Welcome to the Sleepy Stoic. Tonight, we turn our attention to something that lives with us daily. Something so familiar we often fail to notice its presence until we feel its weight pressing down upon our shoulders. We're speaking of the accumulated burdens we carry through our hours, the residue of worry and stress that builds layer upon layer, moment upon moment, until we find ourselves wondering why everything feels so heavy. The ancient Stoics understood something essential about human suffering. They recognized that much of what weighs upon us isn't actually ours to carry. We pick up concerns that belong to circumstances beyond our influence. We shoulder anxieties about outcomes we cannot determine. We grip tightly to judgments about situations that simply are what they are, regardless of our mental strain. And in this holding on, this grasping at what we cannot change, we create a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with the way we relate to our experience. Tonight's exploration focuses on release. Not the kind of letting go that involves suppressing our feelings or pretending difficulties don't exist. Rather, we're interested in the Stoic art of discerning what truly requires our attention and energy from what we've unnecessarily taken on. We're looking at how to set down the burdens that were never ours to carry in the first place. This builds upon foundational Stoic principles, but tonight we move deeper into something more specific. We're examining the mechanics of how we accumulate mental weight throughout our days, and more importantly, how we can learn to release it before it hardens into something chronic. The Stoics had much to say about this, not as abstract philosophy but as practical wisdom for daily living. Consider for a moment the typical journey through a single day. We wake, and almost immediately, thoughts begin to gather. Concerns about the day ahead, memories of yesterday's frustrations, anticipations of what might go wrong, judgments about what should or shouldn't happen. And this is before we've even risen from bed. As the day progresses, we add to this collection. A difficult conversation leaves us rehearsing what we should have said. An unexpected obstacle appears, and we carry frustration about its existence. Someone else's mood affects our own, and we bear the weight of trying to manage their internal state along with ours. By evening, we're exhausted, and not primarily from what we've actually done, but from everything we've mentally carried. The Stoics would say we've been laboring under a confusion, mistaking what's ours to address for what's ours to control, conflating problems we can solve with facts we must simply acknowledge. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journals, returned repeatedly to this theme. He reminded himself night after night that so much of what disturbed him existed only in his judgments about events, not in the events themselves. He recognized that he was often wrestling with his thoughts about circumstances rather than with the circumstances directly. This recognition didn't make challenges disappear, but it helped him identify where his energy was actually needed and where he was exhausting himself unnecessarily. Seneca, in his letters to friends, wrote extensively about the human tendency to borrow suffering from the past and future, to carry anxiety about things that have already happened or might never occur. He observed that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality, that we rehearse disasters that never arrive and maintain permanent vigilance against threats that may never materialize. This constant bracing, this perpetual readiness for catastrophe, creates a burden that weighs us down far more than most actual difficulties would. Epictetus, perhaps most directly of all, taught his students to constantly distinguish between what's up to them and what isn't. He didn't present this as philosophical theory but as practical training for living. His school was less like a modern university and more like a training ground for mental clarity and resilience. Students learned to notice in real time when they were expending energy on things outside their control, and to redirect that energy toward what actually lay within their sphere of influence. Tonight, we're working with these insights, but we're approaching them through a specific lens, that of release. Not control, not management, not strategy, but the simpler, more fundamental act of setting down what we don't need to hold. There's a useful distinction to be made at the outset, one that will guide much of what follows. The Stoics drew a careful line between problems and facts. This isn't merely semantic. The difference has profound implications for how we carry ourselves through life. A problem, properly understood, is something that calls for action, something within our sphere of influence that requires response. If your home needs repair, that's a problem. You can assess it, gather resources, take steps to address it. If a relationship needs attention, that's a problem in this sense. You can reflect, communicate, make efforts toward understanding and connection. Problems engage our practical judgment and our capacity to act. They're the proper domain of our concern and effort. A fact, on the other hand, is simply what is. It may be pleasant or unpleasant, convenient or inconvenient, but it doesn't call for the same kind of mental struggle we bring to problems. The weather is a fact. Traffic patterns are facts. The past is entirely composed of facts. Much of what other people think, feel, and do falls into this category. These things exist as they are, and while they may require us to adapt or respond, they don't require us to mentally wrestle with their existence. The confusion between these two categories creates much of our daily stress. We treat facts as though they're problems, as though our worry or frustration could somehow alter them. We mentally struggle against what simply is, exhausting ourselves in resistance to reality itself. And conversely, we sometimes treat actual problems as though they're immovable facts, becoming passive in situations where we could actually engage meaningfully. Learning to distinguish between these categories isn't about becoming passive or resigned. It's about directing our energy appropriately, bringing our full attention and capability to what we can actually influence while releasing the exhausting habit of struggling against what we cannot change. Consider a simple example. You're driving to an important appointment and you encounter unexpected traffic. The traffic itself is a fact. It exists. Your mental struggle against its existence, your frustration that it's happening, your wish that it weren't so, none of this changes the traffic. This is energy spent in futile resistance to what is. But within this situation, there are actual problems you can address. You can decide whether to take an alternate route. You can communicate with whoever you're meeting about a possible delay. You can use the time to listen to something worthwhile or to simply settle into a few moments of calm before your appointment. These are responses available to you, areas where your judgment and action can make a difference. The Stoic approach isn't to pretend you're happy about the traffic. It's to stop adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from mentally fighting against its existence. It's to notice when you're rehearsing arguments with reality and to redirect that energy toward your actual sphere of influence. This principle extends through countless daily situations. A colleague's chronically poor mood is largely a fact. You can respond to it appropriately, you can maintain boundaries, you can be kind where possible, but you cannot fix it, and your constant worry about it or attempts to mentally manage it become an unnecessary burden. Your own response, however, your own steadiness and clarity, that's your domain. That's where your energy actually accomplishes something. The past, everything that has already occurred, is entirely factual. It exists as it happened. We can learn from it, we can process our feelings about it, but we cannot change it. Yet how much energy do we spend in mental arguments with the past, in wishes that things had gone differently, in rehearsals of what we should have done? The Stoics weren't suggesting we suppress these thoughts when they arise, but rather that we learn to recognize them for what they are, unproductive resistance to what's already fixed, and to gently redirect our attention to what's actually alive, what's actually present to be engaged with. This isn't cold or unfeeling. In fact, it's deeply practical and compassionate. By releasing futile struggle with facts, we free up enormous energy and attention for what actually matters, for the problems we can address, the relationships we can nurture, the choices we can make with care and wisdom. The Stoics understood that we're finite beings. Our energy, attention, and time are limited. How we allocate these resources matters immensely. Every moment spent in mental struggle with unchangeable facts is a moment unavailable for meaningful engagement with actual problems or for simple presence with what's good in our lives. The cost of mental baggage reveals itself gradually. We don't usually notice it accumulating. A single worry, a lone frustration, an isolated regret. These seem manageable, almost negligible. But mental weight doesn't work like physical weight. It compounds in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Physical fatigue has clear signals. Your muscles ache. Your body demands rest. But mental fatigue from carrying unnecessary burdens can persist for years, quietly draining vitality, narrowing our sense of possibility, coloring our experience of life itself. We adapt to it so gradually that we forget we're carrying it. The weight becomes so familiar we mistake it for the normal condition of being human. The Stoics were interested in freedom, not in the political sense primarily, though that mattered too, but in a deeper sense. Freedom as an internal condition, the capacity to move through life without being constantly dragged down by unnecessary mental burdens. They recognized that we can be materially comfortable yet internally imprisoned by our habits of thought, our patterns of clinging and resisting. Seneca wrote about people who live as though they'll live forever, spending their precious days on trivialities and worries, never stopping to consider the actual cost of how they're allocating their attention. He observed that we're careful about our material resources, we track our money, we protect our property, but we're careless with our time and attention, allowing them to be claimed by anything and anyone, rarely pausing to consider whether we're spending these irreplaceable resources wisely. This carelessness extends to what we carry mentally. We pick up worries without examining whether they're ours to carry. We absorb other people's anxieties. We maintain mental inventories of grievances and disappointments. We rehearse potential future problems. And we do all this without ever asking, what is this costing me? What am I not able to attend to because my energy is bound up in this? What's being crowded out of my life by the space this burden occupies in my mind? The cost manifests in various ways. There's the obvious fatigue, the sense of being perpetually tired despite adequate rest. There's the narrowing of attention, the difficulty being fully present with people or activities because part of our mind is always elsewhere, tending to our accumulated worries. There's the erosion of joy, the way that persistent mental burdens create a kind of baseline anxiety that filters every experience, making it difficult to fully receive the good when it appears. Perhaps less obviously, there's the cost to our judgment and decision-making. When we're mentally weighed down, we make different choices. We become more risk-averse, not from wisdom but from depletion. We avoid challenges that might actually be growth opportunities because we're already at capacity. We settle for less in various domains not because we've thoughtfully chosen our priorities, but because we lack the energy to pursue what truly matters. There's also a social cost. People who are carrying heavy mental burdens often become less available to others, less capable of genuine attention and presence. Relationships require a kind of spaciousness, room for curiosity, playfulness, real listening. When we're perpetually preoccupied with our mental baggage, we show up differently, more defended, less open, less capable of the generosity that friendship and love require. The Stoics understood something important about human flourishing. They recognized that excellence in living, what they called virtue, requires a certain internal freedom. Not freedom from all challenge or difficulty, but freedom from unnecessary encumbrance. The person who is mentally burdened by 1,000 worried thoughts, who carries resentments about the past and anxieties about the future, simply doesn't have the same capacity for wisdom, courage, justice, and moderation as someone who has learned to release what's not theirs to carry. This isn't about becoming some kind of superhuman figure, untouched by difficulty. The Stoics faced the same challenges everyone faces: loss, disappointment, political turmoil, illness, death. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire during a plague. Epictetus was enslaved for a significant portion of his life. Seneca navigated the dangerous politics of imperial Rome. They knew hardship intimately. What distinguished them was their practice of not adding unnecessary suffering to inevitable difficulty. They developed the capacity to meet challenges without loading them up with extra mental weight, to face facts without turning them into occasions for useless struggle, to address actual problems without creating phantom problems through worry and anxiety. This capacity isn't innate. It's developed through practice, through repeated noticing of what we're carrying and repeated choice about what to set down. The Stoics treated this as a daily discipline, not something you master once and then possess forever, but a continuous practice of awareness and release. Seneca's insights about unnecessary worry deserve closer attention. He was particularly interested in the ways we create suffering that has no basis in present reality, the ways we torment ourselves about things that haven't happened and often never will. In his letters and essays, Seneca returns repeatedly to a central observation. Most of the things we worry about never occur. And even among those difficulties that do arise, many would be far more manageable if we simply met them when they arrived, rather than suffering through them repeatedly in anticipation. He points out the strange mathematics of anxiety, how we can suffer the same feared event hundreds of times in imagination, then perhaps once in reality, and in doing so multiply our suffering far beyond what the actual circumstance warrants. This isn't to say that all planning or anticipation is problematic. The Stoics valued prudence and foresight. They encouraged preparing for likely difficulties, thinking through potential challenges, developing skills and resources that might be needed. But there's a clear difference between practical preparation and chronic worry. Practical preparation is focused and time-limited. You consider what might be needed, you take appropriate steps, and then you're done. You've addressed what's yours to address. Chronic worry, by contrast, is repetitive and consuming. It rehearses the same concerns without arriving at new insights or useful preparations. It creates a constant background hum of anxiety that doesn't serve any practical purpose but drains significant energy. Seneca observed that we rarely just worry about one thing. We tend to maintain a kind of portfolio of anxieties, a collection of concerns that we mentally cycle through, giving each a bit of attention before moving to the next, then circling back to the first. This creates the illusion that we're being responsible, that we're staying on top of things, but actually we're just exhausting ourselves without addressing anything meaningfully. He also noticed that worry has a peculiar relationship with probability. We don't worry in proportion to how likely something is to happen. We often worry most about dramatic, unlikely scenarios while taking truly probable difficulties in stride. This suggests that worry isn't really about practical preparation at all. It's more like a habit, a pattern of mental activity that runs somewhat independently of actual circumstance. The Stoics would ask, what function is this serving? If worry doesn't actually prevent the things we're worried about, if it doesn't lead to useful preparation or meaningful action, if it primarily just makes us suffer in advance of difficulties that may never arrive, then what are we getting from it? Sometimes worry gives us the feeling that we're doing something, that we're at least mentally addressing a situation even if we can't act on it yet. Sometimes it's a kind of magical thinking, as though our vigilant attention could somehow prevent catastrophe. Sometimes it's simply habit, a well-worn neural pathway that activates automatically under certain conditions. Understanding the function can help with release. If worry is giving us a false sense of control, we can recognize that explicitly and find more honest ways to acknowledge our limitations. If it's magical thinking, we can bring that into the light and see it for what it is. If it's habit, we can work with it as we would any habit, with patience and repeated practice of alternatives. Seneca suggested a particular approach to unnecessary worry. When you notice yourself caught in anxious thinking about potential future difficulties, pause and ask, is this happening now? Not could it happen, not might it happen eventually, but is it happening in this present moment? Usually the answer is no. The present moment, whatever its challenges, rarely contains the catastrophes we're imagining. This isn't about denying that difficulties will arise. They will. Life includes loss, disappointment, unexpected obstacles. But Seneca's point is that we'll be far better equipped to meet those difficulties when they actually arrive if we're not already exhausted from having mentally battled them countless times in advance. There's also the question of whether our worried imaginings actually prepare us for reality. Often they don't. The scenarios we worry about aren't usually what actually happens. Reality tends to be more complex, more nuanced, and often more manageable than our anxious fantasies. So we exhaust ourselves preparing for one thing, and then something quite different occurs, and we meet it without the benefit of all that worried preparation anyway. The Stoic alternative isn't to stop thinking about the future. It's to engage with future possibilities from a different mental stance. You can consider what might be needed, prepare what's reasonably preparable, and then return your attention to what's actually in front of you. You can develop general capacities, resilience, wisdom, practical skills that will serve you regardless of which specific challenges arise. You can trust that when difficulties appear, you'll meet them with whatever resources you have at that moment, and that your worried rehearsals now aren't adding much to those resources. The evening held particular significance for the Stoics. It was a time for reflection, for reviewing the day that had passed, and importantly, for release. They understood that how we end our day shapes the quality of our rest and influences how we begin the next day. The practice of evening release wasn't incidental to their philosophy. It was central. Marcus Aurelius would reflect each evening on what had happened during the day, not to judge himself harshly but to learn, to notice patterns, to consider how he might respond differently to similar situations in the future. But this reflection had a particular quality. It wasn't rumination. It wasn't rehearsal of grievances or anxious review of mistakes. It was more like a gentle clearing, an acknowledgement of what had occurred, followed by a conscious setting down of what didn't need to be carried into night and the next day. The Stoics recognized something we often forget. Each day offers countless opportunities to pick up burdens, small annoyances and larger difficulties, unmet expectations and unexpected obstacles. If we simply accumulate these without ever releasing them, we carry an ever-growing weight. The evening represented a natural point for addressing this accumulation, for discerning what actually needed continued attention from what could be acknowledged and released. This practice wasn't complicated. It didn't require special equipment or extensive time. It simply required a commitment to pause before sleep, to bring gentle awareness to what the day had contained, and to consciously choose what would be carried forward and what would be set down. You might review the day and notice a difficult conversation that left you frustrated. The Stoic approach wouldn't be to suppress that frustration or pretend it didn't matter. It would be to acknowledge it clearly, to consider whether any action on your part is needed or possible, whether there's something to learn from the situation, and then to release the repetitive mental rehashing that serves no purpose. The conversation happened. It was what it was. If amends are needed, they can be made tomorrow. If nothing more can be done, then continued mental struggle with it becomes unnecessary burden. You might notice worries about tomorrow, concerns about upcoming challenges. Again, the Stoic approach is to acknowledge these clearly. Is there any useful preparation you can do now? If so, do it or plan for it. If not, if the matter must simply be met when it arrives, then rehearsing it tonight doesn't help. It only ensures you'll be more tired when you face it tomorrow. This evening practice serves multiple functions. Most obviously, it helps clear the mind for rest. Sleep is difficult when we're mentally churning through the day's events or tomorrow's concerns. By consciously releasing what doesn't need to be carried, we create the conditions for genuine rest. But there's a deeper function as well. The practice trains a kind of awareness, a capacity to notice what we're holding and to make conscious choices about it. Without this practice, our mental grasping and clinging happens automatically below the level of conscious choice. We simply find ourselves burdened without ever having decided to pick things up. The evening practice brings this process into the light. It makes it something we can work with consciously. Over time, this practice changes more than just your evenings. It begins to influence how you move through your entire day. You start noticing in the moment when you're picking up unnecessary burdens. You catch yourself beginning to rehearse a grievance or worry about something you can't control, and you recognize these patterns more quickly, which means you have more opportunity to choose differently. The Stoics understood that freedom is largely about awareness and choice. We can't control what happens to us, but we have significant influence over our responses and over what we hold and what we release. The evening practice is training in this fundamental capacity. Seneca recommended reviewing not just the day's external events, but also your own responses. How did you meet challenges? Were there moments when you responded with wisdom and steadiness? Were there moments when you were swept away by anger or fear or frustration? The point isn't self-judgment, it's self-knowledge. You're learning about your own patterns, your triggers, your habits of mind. This knowledge makes change possible. And importantly, Seneca emphasized bringing kindness to this review. You're human. You'll sometimes respond in ways you later regret. You'll get caught up in worry or anger. You'll forget your principles and react automatically. This is ordinary. It's part of learning. The evening review isn't about perfect performance. It's about honest awareness and gentle correction, about noticing what happened without adding unnecessary judgment, and about setting the intention to bring a bit more wisdom to tomorrow's challenges. As we establish this foundation for exploring release, it's important to clarify one more distinction: the difference between what's ours to address and what's ours to release. This isn't always obvious. We often feel responsible for things that aren't actually ours to carry, and sometimes we release responsibility for things that genuinely do belong to our sphere of influence. The Stoic framework offers guidance here. Remember the fundamental principle: some things are up to us and some things are not. What's up to us, primarily, are our own judgments, intentions, desires, and aversions. Our own mental and moral character, how we choose to respond to circumstances, the effort we make to live according to our values. What's not up to us includes most external outcomes, other people's thoughts and feelings, the past, much of what happens in the present, our reputation, our health to a significant degree, and countless other things that are influenced by factors beyond our control. This framework helps clarify what's ours to address. You're responsible for your own integrity, for making honest effort, for treating people decently, for examining your own judgments and trying to think clearly. You're responsible for doing what's in your power to do in any situation. This is your domain, and it's substantial enough to occupy a lifetime of attention. But you're not responsible for whether your honest efforts succeed by external measures. You're not responsible for other people's responses to you. You're not responsible for preventing all difficulty or for managing everyone else's well-being. You're not responsible for having already achieved wisdom you haven't yet developed. The confusion between these domains creates enormous unnecessary burden. We take on responsibility for things we cannot control, then exhaust ourselves trying to manage the unmanageable. Or we feel guilty about outcomes that were never ours to determine. This isn't noble. It's confusion, and it serves no one. Consider a parent's relationship with an adult child. The parent may care deeply about the child's well-being and want to help where possible. That care is natural and good. But the parent cannot live the adult child's life, cannot make their choices for them, cannot prevent all their difficulties or ensure all their successes. If the parent tries to carry responsibility for outcomes that belong to the adult child's own life and choices, both people suffer. The parent is burdened by impossible responsibility. The adult child is prevented from fully inhabiting their own autonomy. What's the parents to address? Their own behavior toward the child, their availability for genuine support when asked, their own example of living with integrity, their willingness to listen without taking over. What's the parents to release? Control over the child's choices, responsibility for the child's emotional states, the illusion that worry equals care. This principle extends through countless situations. You're responsible for your own work, for bringing full attention and honest effort to it. You're not responsible for whether others recognize or reward that effort appropriately. You're responsible for speaking truth as you understand it. You're not responsible for whether others accept or agree with it. You're responsible for extending kindness. You're not responsible for whether it's received or reciprocated. The Stoics would say this isn't about lowering standards or caring less. It's about directing your care appropriately, about understanding where your agency actually lies and focusing your energy there. When you stop trying to control what you cannot control, you become far more effective at addressing what you actually can influence. There's also the question of what belongs to right now versus what belongs to future attention. Sometimes we carry things that are genuinely ours to address, but not yet. Not tonight. The Stoics valued timing. They understood that not everything that matters needs to be addressed immediately. Some problems ripen. Some need time before the right response becomes clear. Some require resources or circumstances that aren't yet available. Wisdom includes knowing when to act and when to wait. When something is genuinely yours to address but the time isn't right, you can acknowledge it and set it aside until it needs your active attention. This isn't avoidance. It's appropriate timing. You're not carrying it in the sense of mentally struggling with it constantly. You're simply aware that it will need attention when the right moment comes. This foundation, these distinctions between problems and facts, between what's ours to address and what's ours to release, between useful preparation and unnecessary worry, this gives us a framework for everything that follows. We're not trying to release everything, to stop caring, to become passive. We're learning to distinguish carefully so that we can bring our full presence and capacity to what truly matters, unburdened by what never needed to be carried. The Stoics were teachers of freedom in the deepest sense. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from illusion, from the countless ways we burden ourselves unnecessarily, from the confusion that has us trying to control what we cannot control while neglecting what we actually can influence. This freedom isn't achieved once and then possessed. It's practiced daily, learned through repeated attention, developed gradually through the seasons of a life committed to clarity and release. We move now into deeper waters. The foundation has been set, and we have begun to understand that what we call stress is often not the event itself, but our relationship to it, our grip upon it, our refusal to set it down. In this segment, we explore the architecture of that grip, the reasons we hold on, and the Stoic wisdom that teaches us how to open our hands. There is a passage in Seneca's letters where he describes the mind as a vessel. He speaks of how we fill this vessel each day with impressions, opinions, judgments, and worries. Some of what we place in this vessel is necessary, the substance of living, but much of it is not. We collect grievances like pebbles. We gather worries about things that may never occur. We carry conversations that ended weeks ago, turning them over and over, refining our responses, imagining different outcomes. Seneca asks us to consider what happens to a vessel that is never emptied, only filled. Eventually, he suggests there is no room for anything new, anything nourishing, anything that might actually serve us. This image resonates across the centuries because it captures something essential about the human condition. We are collectors by nature. We collect experiences, memories, emotions. But unlike physical objects, mental burdens do not announce their weight until we have carried them for some time. A single stone is barely noticed. 100 stones become unbearable. And yet, we often do not realize we are carrying 100 stones until our knees buckle. The Stoics were acutely aware of this tendency. They observed that the mind, left to its own devices, will accumulate. It will hold grudges, replay injuries, anticipate disasters, and rehearse conversations that will never happen. This is not a flaw in our design. It is, rather, a feature that once served us well. Our ancestors survived in part because they remembered dangers, anticipated threats, and remained vigilant. But in the context of modern life, this same mechanism often works against us. The threats we face now are rarely the immediate physical dangers that require constant vigilance. Instead, we face abstract concerns, social anxieties, and the chronic low-grade stressors of complex society. And yet, our minds still respond as if every email, every unexpected bill, every difficult conversation is a matter of life and death. The art of letting go begins with recognizing this pattern. It begins with observing, without judgment, how we collect and carry things that do not serve us. The Stoics called this practice prosoke, a kind of continuous attention to one's own mental processes. It is not meditation in the modern sense, though it shares some qualities. It is more like a gentle, ongoing inquiry, a habit of noticing. What am I holding right now? What is this thought I am entertaining? Does it serve my well-being or my virtue? Is it within my control? These questions are not meant to eliminate all discomfort or challenge. The Stoic does not seek to live without difficulty. Rather, the Stoic seeks to carry only what is truly theirs to carry, to address what is truly theirs to address, and to release the rest. This distinction is crucial. There is a difference between facing a challenge and being consumed by it. There is a difference between acknowledging a difficulty and allowing it to occupy every corner of your consciousness. Consider the nature of worry. Seneca, in his essay on tranquility, writes extensively about the torment of unnecessary worry. He describes people who are constantly anxious about the future, who cannot enjoy the present moment because they are too busy anticipating disasters that may never come. He notes that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality. This observation, made 2,000 years ago, remains startlingly accurate. How much of your stress is about something that is actually happening right now, and how much is about something that might happen or something that happened in the past and cannot be changed? This is not to suggest that planning for the future is unwise or that learning from the past is unnecessary. The Stoics were practical people. They understood the value of preparation and reflection, but they distinguished between useful forethought and corrosive worry. Useful forethought involves assessing a situation, considering your options, taking appropriate action, and then releasing your attachment to a specific outcome. Corrosive worry, by contrast, involves endless mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios, accompanied by a sense of helplessness and dread, without any constructive action. The difference lies in agency and acceptance. When we engage in useful forethought, we exercise our agency where we have it and accept the limits of our control. When we engage in corrosive worry, we exhaust ourselves attempting to control what cannot be controlled, or we paralyze ourselves by imagining every possible disaster without taking any actual steps to address them. The first leads to action and then peace. The second leads to exhaustion and anxiety. Epictetus often asked his students to examine their impressions, to pause before accepting them as truth. An impression arises, a thought appears, a worry suggests itself. At that moment, before it becomes a settled conviction, there is space. In that space, we have a choice. We can accept the impression uncritically, allowing it to shape our emotions and actions. Or we can examine it, test it, and decide whether it deserves our mental energy. This practice is not about suppressing emotions or denying reality. It is about discernment. It is about recognizing that not every thought that enters your mind is worthy of your attention. Some thoughts are simply noise, the mental equivalent of background chatter. They arise from habit, from past conditioning, from the constant stimulation of modern life. They do not reflect reality, and they do not require your engagement. Imagine for a moment that you are standing beside a river. Thoughts and impressions float past you like leaves on the water. Some are beautiful, some are ugly, some are merely unremarkable. You do not need to reach out and grab every leaf. You do not need to examine each one, turn it over, catalog it, keep it. You can simply watch them pass. This is not indifference. It is discernment. It is the recognition that you have limited time and energy, and you must choose where to direct them. The challenge, of course, is that some leaves appear urgent. Some seem to demand our attention. A worry about finances, a concern about a relationship, a memory of a past failure. These do not simply drift past. They latch on, they recur, they amplify, and before we know it, we are not watching the river, we are drowning in it. This is where Stoic practice becomes essential. The Stoics developed specific techniques for managing these persistent impressions, these recurring worries. One of the most powerful is the practice of distinguishing between problems and facts. This distinction may seem subtle at first, but it is transformative. A fact is something that is true, something that exists in reality. It is raining. You have a difficult meeting tomorrow. A relationship has ended. Your health is not what it was. These are facts. They are part of the texture of your life. A problem, on the other hand, is a fact plus a story, a fact plus resistance, a fact plus the belief that things should be otherwise. The rain itself is not a problem. The rain plus your belief that it should not be raining, plus your frustration that your plans are disrupted, plus your worry that this means something bad about your day, that combination is a problem. The difficult meeting is a fact. The difficult meeting plus your anxiety about how it will go, plus your fear of judgment, plus your rehearsal of worst-case scenarios, plus your resentment that you have to attend it all, that combination is a problem. Do you see the distinction? The fact is often quite simple, quite manageable. The problem is what we construct around the fact. And what we construct is often far heavier, far more burdensome than the fact itself. Seneca observed that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This is what he meant. The reality is often bearable. The story we tell ourselves about the reality, the weight we add to it, that is what becomes unbearable. This is not to minimize genuine difficulty. Life includes real challenges, real losses, real pain. The Stoics did not deny this. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire, who faced war, plague, betrayal, and personal tragedy, knew hardship intimately. He did not suggest that we pretend difficulties do not exist. Rather, he suggested that we see them clearly, without embellishment, without the added layers of anxiety and resistance that so often multiply our suffering. In his meditations, Marcus frequently reminds himself to strip things down to their essence, to see them as they are. A loved one has died. That is the fact. It is painful, it is sad. It is part of the human condition. The problem arises when we add to this fact, when we tell ourselves it is unfair, that it should not have happened, that we cannot bear it, that life is now meaningless. These additions do not honor the lost. They do not serve us. They simply compound our suffering. This practice of distinguishing problems from facts is not cold or unfeeling. It is, in fact, deeply compassionate. When we see facts clearly, we can respond to them appropriately. We can grieve a loss fully, without the added burden of believing we should not have to grieve. We can face a challenge with our full attention, without exhausting ourselves with worry before we even begin. We can acknowledge pain without making it our entire identity. The cost of mental baggage is substantial. It is not just that worry is unpleasant, though it is. It is that mental baggage consumes resources. Your attention, your energy, your creativity, your capacity for joy, these are finite resources. When a significant portion of your mental energy is devoted to carrying old grievances, rehearsing future disasters, or resisting present facts, there is less available for everything else. Less for your work, less for your relationships, less for your own well-being. Seneca makes this point vividly in his essay on the shortness of life. He argues that life is not actually short, but we waste much of it. We waste it on trivial pursuits, on anxiety, on holding grudges, on worrying about things that do not ultimately matter. He writes of people who spend years preparing to live, accumulating wealth and status, only to realize at the end that they never actually lived. They were always too busy, too worried, too consumed by concerns that, in retrospect, seem insignificant. This is the cost of not letting go. It is not just discomfort in the moment. It is the gradual erosion of your life, the slow accumulation of moments lost to worry and regret. Each moment you spend replaying a past conversation is a moment you are not present. Each moment you spend anxious about tomorrow is a moment you are not alive today. This is not metaphorical. It is literal. Your life is composed of moments, and each one spent in unnecessary mental turmoil is a moment you cannot reclaim. The Stoics understood that time is the most precious resource. Unlike money or possessions, time cannot be saved or stored. It passes whether you use it well or poorly. And how you use your mind determines, in large measure, how you experience your time. Two people can experience the same event and have entirely different lives based on what they choose to hold on to and what they choose to release. Consider two people who both lose a job. One person takes the fact of job loss and adds layers of meaning. They tell themselves they are a failure, that they will never find another position, that this proves they are not capable, that their life is ruined. They carry this story with them, and it colors every subsequent experience. Months later, they are still rehearsing the moment they were let go, still nursing resentment, still wrapped in a narrative of victimhood and despair. The other person acknowledges the fact of job loss. It is difficult, it is unwelcome, but it is also an opportunity to reassess, to explore new directions, to address whatever might be learned from the experience. They feel disappointment, perhaps even grief, but they do not construct an identity around the event. They process it and move forward. Both faced the same fact, but their lives diverge because of what they chose to carry. The question then becomes, how do we develop this capacity? How do we learn to distinguish between facts and problems, between what is ours to carry and what we can release? The answer lies in practice, in cultivating specific mental habits that, over time, reshape how we relate to our experiences. One of the most powerful Stoic practices for releasing mental burdens is the evening review. Seneca describes this practice in his letters, and it remains remarkably effective. Each evening before sleep, you review your day, not in a spirit of harsh judgment, but in a spirit of inquiry. What went well? Where did I act in accordance with my values? Where did I fall short? Where did I hold on to something I might have released? Where did I expend energy on something outside my control? This practice serves multiple purposes. First, it creates a natural boundary between day and night. By consciously reviewing and then releasing the day's events, you are less likely to carry them into your sleep, less likely to lie awake replaying conversations or worrying about tomorrow. Second, it builds self-awareness. Over time, you begin to notice patterns. You see where you habitually get caught, where you repeatedly carry burdens that do not serve you. And third, it reinforces your agency. By reviewing your responses to events, you remind yourself that while you cannot control what happens, you can control how you engage with it. Seneca's version of this practice involved a gentle self-interrogation. He would ask himself questions like, what bad habit did I cure today? What vice did I resist? In what respect am I better? But he also included questions that encouraged release. What unnecessary burden did I carry today? What worry did I entertain that served no purpose? The aim was not to berate himself, but to learn, to gradually refine his responses, to become more skillful at living. This practice can be adapted to your own needs and circumstances. You might keep a journal, or you might simply sit quietly for a few moments. The form matters less than the consistency and the spirit. The spirit is one of gentle curiosity, of wanting to understand yourself better, not to judge or punish yourself. Another practice that supports the release of daily stress is the conscious acknowledgement of what is complete. Much of our mental burden comes from a sense of incompleteness, a feeling that there are loose ends, unresolved issues, tasks left undone. This feeling can persist even when there is nothing actually left to do, simply because we have not consciously acknowledged completion. At the end of the day, it can be helpful to name what you have completed, not in a spirit of achievement or pride, though there is nothing wrong with acknowledging your efforts, but simply as a way of creating closure. You had a difficult conversation. It is done. The outcome is what it is. You completed a task. It may not be perfect, but it is finished for now. You faced a challenge. You responded as best you could. That chapter is closed. This may seem trivial, but it is not. The mind craves resolution. When we do not consciously mark something as complete, it remains open in our mental space, using up resources, generating low-level anxiety. By consciously acknowledging completion, even if the outcome is not what you hoped, you signal to yourself that it is time to set this down, that you have done what you can, that continuing to hold on to it serves no purpose. This practice is especially important for those things that do not have clear resolutions. You had a disagreement with a colleague. You stated your position, they stated theirs, and you agreed to disagree. There is no resolution in the sense of full agreement, but the conversation is complete. Continuing to rehearse it, continuing to imagine what you should have said, continuing to harbor resentment, none of this changes the outcome. It only prolongs your suffering. The Stoics were pragmatic about such matters. Epictetus taught that once you have done what is within your power, you must accept the outcome, whatever it is. This is not passivity. It is wisdom. It is recognizing that at a certain point, further mental engagement with an issue is not productive. It is simply torture. There is a related practice that can be helpful, the practice of imagining release physically. The connection between physical and mental letting go is well established. When we hold tension in our bodies, our minds remain tense. When we relax our bodies, our minds often follow. This is not merely metaphorical. There are actual physiological connections between physical tension and mental states. The Stoics were aware of this, though they did not have the language of modern neuroscience to describe it. They observed that people who are physically agitated tend to be mentally agitated, and vice versa. They encouraged practices that brought the body into a state of ease, not for the sake of physical comfort alone, but because this supported mental clarity and tranquility. You might experiment with this. At the end of the day, after your evening review, you might take a few moments to consciously relax your body. Notice where you are holding tension. Often we hold it in our shoulders, our jaw, our hands. As you notice tension, imagine it as something you are gripping, and then imagine setting it down. You can pair this with a breath. Breathe in, notice the tension. Breathe out, release it. This is not a complex practice. It is simple and direct. But simplicity does not mean ineffective. As you practice physical release, you might also notice thoughts and worries that arise. Do not fight them. Simply notice them, and as you exhale, imagine releasing them as well. You are not suppressing them or denying them. You are simply acknowledging that, for now, you are choosing to set them down. They may return tomorrow, and if they do, you will address them then. But right now, in this moment, you are releasing them. This practice works because it gives your mind and body a concrete action. Letting go can feel abstract, vague, like trying to grasp smoke. But pairing it with breath and physical relaxation makes it tangible. You are not just thinking about letting go. You are doing it in a way that your nervous system can recognize and respond to. What distinguishes Stoic practice from mere technique is the underlying philosophy, the commitment to live in accordance with nature and reason. The practices we have been discussing are not just tools for feeling better, though they may indeed help you feel better. They are expressions of a particular view of life, a view that holds that virtue, wisdom, and tranquility come from aligning yourself with reality, from accepting what is, and from exercising your agency only where you actually have it. This brings us to one of the most profound Stoic teachings, the recognition that most of what troubles us is not ours to address. This may sound strange at first. If something troubles you, surely it is yours to address. But the Stoics made a crucial distinction between what troubles you and what is yours to address. Many things may trouble you, but only some of those things are actually within your power to change. Epictetus was insistent on this point. He taught that there are things within our control and things not within our control. Within our control are our own judgments, impulses, desires, and aversions. Not within our control is everything else: the actions of others, the weather, the past, the future, our reputation, our health beyond basic care, the outcome of our efforts. He insisted that tranquility comes from focusing our energy on what is within our control and accepting everything else with equanimity. This teaching can be misunderstood. It does not mean you become passive or indifferent. It does not mean you stop caring about outcomes or stop trying to influence the world. It means you distinguish between effort and outcome. Your effort is within your control. The outcome is not. You can work diligently, apply your skills, act with integrity, and the outcome may still not be what you hoped. This is not a failure. It is simply the nature of reality. Many factors beyond your control influence outcomes. The art of releasing daily stress involves internalizing this distinction. When you face a challenge, you ask yourself, what part of this is within my control? The answer is often quite limited. You can control your preparation, your attitude, your actions. You cannot control how others respond, whether circumstances cooperate, whether the outcome is favorable. Once you have done what is within your control, the rest is not yours to carry. This may feel uncomfortable at first, particularly if you are accustomed to believing that sufficient effort or worry will guarantee a particular outcome. But experience teaches otherwise. You have no doubt worried intensely about things that turned out fine. You have no doubt prepared meticulously for things that still went wrong. Worry and effort are not guarantees. They are inputs, and inputs do not determine outputs in any simple way. Recognizing this does not mean giving up. It means adjusting your expectations to align with reality. You do your best, and then you release attachment to the outcome. You care about the outcome, you prefer certain outcomes, but you do not make your tranquility dependent on getting exactly what you want. This is what the Stoics called being indifferent to preferred indifference. You have preferences, you pursue what you prefer, but you do not lose your composure when reality does not cooperate. Consider a practical example. You are preparing for an important presentation at work. Within your control is your preparation. You can research thoroughly, organize your thoughts, practice your delivery, get adequate rest. All of this is within your control, and the Stoics would encourage you to do it diligently. But the outcome of the presentation is not entirely within your control. Your audience may be distracted, your technology may fail, your message may be misunderstood. You can influence these things to some degree, but you cannot control them. If you tie your sense of worth or your peace of mind to the outcome, you are at the mercy of factors beyond your control. But if you focus on doing your part well and accept that the outcome will be what it will be, you are free. You can present with confidence, knowing you have prepared well. If it goes well, that is good. If it does not, you have still acted with integrity, still done what was within your power, and that is enough. This is not lowering your standards. It is clarifying where your standards apply. Your standards apply to your character, your effort, your integrity. They do not apply to things beyond your control. You cannot hold yourself to the standard of controlling the uncontrollable. That is not a high standard. It is an impossible one, and pursuing it leads only to frustration and anxiety. Seneca, in his letters, often returns to this theme. He writes of people who exhaust themselves trying to manage everything, trying to control every variable, trying to ensure every outcome. He observes that such people are never at peace because there is always something outside their control that might go wrong. And inevitably, something does go wrong because that is the nature of life. Life is uncertain, complex, and largely beyond our control. Accepting this is not pessimism. It is realism. And realism is the foundation of tranquility. There is a related practice that can help internalize this teaching. It is the practice of distinguishing between preference and attachment. These preferences are natural and reasonable. The Stoics did not ask you to pretend you do not have preferences, but they distinguished between having a preference and being attached to it, being dependent on it, making your happiness conditional on it. You can prefer that your presentation goes well without being attached to that outcome. You can hope for it, work toward it, and still be at peace if it does not happen. The difference is internal. Preference is, I would like this to happen. Attachment is, I must have this or I will be devastated. Preference leaves room for reality to unfold as it will. Attachment makes you brittle, vulnerable to every twist of fate. This distinction is subtle but transformative. It allows you to engage fully with life, to care about outcomes, to pursue your goals without being at the mercy of circumstances. It allows you to hold things lightly, to appreciate what you have without clinging to it, to strive for what you want without being crushed if you do not get it. The metaphor of weight and burden runs throughout Stoic thought. Marcus Aurelius speaks of casting aside the burden of false judgments. Epictetus describes the relief that comes from realizing you need not carry the opinions of others. Seneca writes of the lightness that comes from simplifying your desires. All of them recognize that much of what we carry is optional, that we add weight to our lives through our interpretations, our resistance, our attachments. Think of a physical burden, a heavy pack you carry on a long journey. At first, you may not notice the weight, but as the hours pass, every additional pound becomes significant. Your shoulders ache, your back strains, your pace slows. Now imagine that you stop and open the pack. Inside, you find items you do not need, things you picked up along the way without thinking, things others told you to carry, things you forgot were even there. What do? You remove them. You lighten your load. The journey becomes easier, not because the path has changed, but because you are carrying less. This is an apt metaphor for mental burdens. We accumulate them without noticing. Someone criticizes us, and we add that criticism to our pack. We make a mistake, and we add the shame of it. We face a setback, and we add the story that we are inadequate. Years pass, and we are carrying a tremendous weight, much of which is not even ours. Some of it belongs to others. Some of it is based on misunderstandings. Some of it is simply outdated, no longer relevant to who we are or what we face. The Stoics encourage us to periodically stop, examine what we are carrying, and consciously decide what to keep and what to release. This is not easy. Some burdens feel like part of our identity. We have carried them so long, we do not know who we would be without them. A person who has defined themselves by a past injury may feel lost if they let go of the resentment. A person who has built their identity around being a worrier may feel anxious about not being anxious. But identity is not fixed. Who you are is not the same as what you carry. You can release a burden without losing yourself. In fact, you often discover more of yourself when you release what does not serve you. Beneath the layers of accumulated judgments, worries, and grievances is a person capable of clarity, resilience, and peace. That person has been there all along, simply obscured. The Stoic philosophers themselves exemplified this. Marcus Aurelius carried the literal burden of an empire, dealing with war, political intrigue, and personal loss. Yet his writings reveal a man continually working to lighten his internal burden, to focus on what mattered, to release what did not. Seneca, who held great wealth and political power, wrote most compellingly about the dangers of excess, the peace that comes from simplicity, the freedom that comes from releasing attachment to external things. Epictetus, who had been a slave and later became a teacher, understood profoundly that external circumstances do not determine internal freedom. He taught that freedom comes from within, from releasing the belief that you need circumstances to be a certain way in order to be at peace. These were not men who lived easy lives. They faced real challenges, real hardships. Their teachings are not the musings of people who never suffered. They are the distilled wisdom of people who suffered and found a way to remain whole, to remain tranquil, to remain free. They did so by learning the art of letting go, by practicing daily release, by distinguishing between what was theirs to carry and what they could set down. Let us consider another aspect of this practice, the releasing of what is not ours to begin with. Often, we carry burdens that do not even belong to us. We carry the expectations of others, the judgments of society, the shoulds and oughts that we absorbed without questioning. These burdens can be the heaviest of all because we do not recognize them as foreign. We mistake them for our own values, our own desires. Epictetus spoke about this when he taught his students to examine their judgments. Where did this judgment come from? Is it truly mine, or did I adopt it uncritically from my culture, my family, my peers? He encouraged them to test their beliefs, to see if they held up under scrutiny, and to discard those that did not serve their well-being or their virtue. The relief that comes from releasing these foreign burdens can be profound. When you stop trying to live up to standards that are not your own, when you stop pursuing goals that do not actually matter to you, when you stop judging yourself by metrics that someone else invented, you discover a spaciousness, a freedom. You have energy and attention to devote to what actually matters, what actually aligns with who you are. This does not mean you ignore all external feedback or live without regard for others. The Stoics were deeply committed to social virtue, to contributing to the common good. But they distinguished between living virtuously in community and living according to the arbitrary judgments of others. You can care about others, serve others, and still be free from the tyranny of their opinions. Marcus Aurelius, who was one of the most powerful men in the world, constantly reminded himself that the opinions of others are not within his control and therefore not his concern. He writes, "I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others." He recognized the absurdity of giving more weight to others' judgments than to your own, especially when those others know far less about your circumstances, your intentions, and your character than you do. The practice here is to regularly ask yourself, whose judgment am I carrying? Whose expectation am I trying to meet? Is this truly mine, or have I borrowed it? When you identify a burden that is not yours, you can consciously release it. You do not need to be aggressive or dramatic about it. You simply acknowledge, this is not mine, and you set it down. There is a particular kind of burden that deserves special attention, the burden of unnecessary worry. Seneca devoted considerable thought to this, observing that much of what we call worry is not about actual present danger but about imagined future catastrophes. He noted that we torment ourselves with scenarios that may never occur, exhausting ourselves before we face any real challenge. He wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." This single sentence captures a profound truth about human psychology. Our capacity for imagination, which can be a source of creativity and planning, can also become a source of endless suffering when it fixates on disaster. We imagine everything that could go wrong. We rehearse the worst outcomes. We feel the fear, the disappointment, the humiliation, all without any of it actually happening. And then, often, the thing we worried about either does not happen at all or happens in a way far less catastrophic than we imagined. But the time we spent worrying is gone. The energy we expended is depleted. The peace we sacrificed is lost. This is the cost of unnecessary worry. It is not just that worry is unpleasant in the moment. It is that worry consumes your life, moment by moment, in exchange for nothing. It does not prevent the feared event. It does not prepare you in any useful way. It simply makes you suffer in advance. The Stoic response to unnecessary worry is twofold. First, examine the worry. What exactly are you worried about? Is it within your control? If not, worrying is pointless. If it is within your control, what action can you take? Take that action and then release the worry. Second, use premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, in a structured way. Instead of allowing your mind to spiral into catastrophic imagination, consciously consider the worst-case scenario, examine it clearly, and recognize that even the worst case is usually survivable. This may seem counterintuitive. Why would deliberately imagining the worst help reduce worry? Because structured contemplation is different from anxious rumination. When you deliberately consider a worst-case scenario, you approach it with reason. You see it clearly, without the emotional amplification that comes from trying not to think about it. You realize that even if the worst happens, you will find a way to respond, to adapt, to continue. This realization is empowering. It breaks the spell of catastrophic thinking. Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly. He would remind himself of his mortality, of the impermanence of all things, of the possibility of loss. But he did this not to depress himself, but to prepare himself to put things in perspective. When you recognize that everything is temporary, that loss is inevitable, that change is the nature of existence, present worries seem less overwhelming. You are not shocked by difficulty. You are not undone by setback. You have already considered these possibilities, accepted them as part of life, and prepared yourself mentally to face them. This practice does not make you pessimistic. It makes you resilient. It removes the element of surprise from misfortune. When you have considered that something might go wrong, you are not devastated when it does. You are prepared. You have already thought through how you might respond. And often you realize that what seemed catastrophic is actually manageable. Seneca tells a story about a man who spent his life in constant fear of poverty. He had wealth, but he could not enjoy it because he was always afraid of losing it. Every downturn in the market sent him into panic. Every expense felt like a step toward ruin. Finally, a friend suggested that he spend a few days living as if he were poor. He ate simple food, wore plain clothes, slept on a hard bed. After a few days, he realized that poverty was not the catastrophe he had imagined. It was uncomfortable, certainly, but it was not unbearable. And this realization freed him. He no longer feared poverty because he knew he could survive it. His wealth became a resource he could enjoy rather than a thing he desperately clung to. This is the power of facing your fears clearly. When you see them for what they are, rather than what your imagination makes them, they lose their power to terrorize you. You realize that you are more resilient than you thought, that you can adapt, that you can find a way forward even in difficult circumstances. And this realization is itself a form of release. You release the fear because you no longer need it. You have seen that what you feared is not as terrible as you imagined. When you notice worry arising, pause and ask yourself, what exactly am I worried about? Define it as precisely as possible. Not, I'm worried about work, but I'm worried that my manager will be disappointed with my report. Not, I'm worried about my health, but I'm worried that this symptom might indicate something serious. The more specific you can be, the more clearly you can see whether the worry is realistic and whether there is anything you can do about it. Often, when you define a worry precisely, it becomes clear that it is either unlikely or manageable. Or it becomes clear that there is a specific action you can take, which transforms the worry into a task. Tasks are much easier to deal with than vague worries. A task has a beginning, a middle, and an end. A task can be completed, checked off, released. A vague worry just lingers, consuming your energy indefinitely. The Stoics were practical people. They understood that philosophy must serve life, not just intellectual curiosity. The practices they developed were designed to be used, to be applied in daily situations, to make a real difference in how you experience your days. The art of releasing daily stress is not an abstract ideal. It is a set of concrete practices that, when applied consistently, change your relationship to difficulty, worry, and burden. This is the Stoic promise. Not that life will be without hardship, but that you can be whole and free and tranquil regardless of hardship. This freedom is the fruit of letting go, of releasing what is not yours to carry, of setting down the burdens that do not serve your virtue or your well-being. As we conclude this segment, it is worth reflecting on the cumulative effect of these practices. Any single practice applied once may seem insignificant. The evening review, the distinction between problems and facts, the examination of what is within your control, the releasing of others' judgments, these may each seem like small things. But small things practiced consistently compound over time. The Stoics understood this. They did not seek dramatic transformations. They sought gradual refinement, daily progress, the slow accumulation of wisdom and virtue. Marcus Aurelius did not become a philosopher king overnight. He became one through years of practice, years of returning to the same basic questions, years of choosing virtue over impulse, clarity over confusion, release over grasping. This is the nature of genuine growth. It is not a single moment of insight, though such moments may occur. It is the daily choice to live according to your principles, to apply your practices, to examine your judgments, and to release what does not serve you. Over time, these daily choices reshape you. They become who you are. You may not notice the change day to day, but if you look back over months or years, you will see the difference. Situations that once overwhelmed you now seem manageable. Worries that once consumed you now pass more quickly. Burdens that once felt unbearable now seem lighter, not because the burdens have changed, but because you have changed. You have become more skillful at carrying what is yours and releasing what is not. This transformation is available to anyone willing to practice. It does not require special circumstances, innate talent, or extraordinary resources. It requires only consistency, honesty, and a willingness to examine yourself without judgment. The Stoics were ordinary people who faced the same challenges we face, the same fears, the same tendencies toward worry and rumination. What made them different was not their circumstances, but their practices. They chose daily to live according to philosophy, and over time that choice made all the difference. The deep exploration we have undertaken in this segment is not meant to be memorized or mastered all at once. It is meant to be lived with, returned to, explored from different angles as you continue your practice. Each idea we have touched on, the distinction between problems and facts, the cost of mental baggage, the nature of unnecessary worry, the releasing of others' judgments, the connection between preference and attachment, each of these is a doorway into deeper understanding. You might focus on one idea for a week, noticing how it shows up in your daily experience. You might keep a journal, recording instances where you successfully distinguished between a problem and a fact, or where you caught yourself carrying a burden that was not yours. This kind of reflection deepens your practice. It moves philosophy from abstract understanding to lived wisdom. The Stoics called this process ascesis, which can be translated as training or discipline. It is not discipline in a harsh or punitive sense. It is discipline in the sense of practice, of repeatedly returning to your principles and your practices, of training yourself the way an athlete trains, through consistent, mindful repetition. Over time, what once required conscious effort becomes more natural. You find yourself automatically questioning your judgments, automatically distinguishing between what you can control and what you cannot, automatically releasing burdens that you would once have carried. This is not suppression. It is transformation. You are not forcing yourself to ignore your feelings or pretend you are not stressed. You are genuinely changing your relationship to stress, to difficulty, to challenge. You are becoming someone who faces life's difficulties with equanimity, not because the difficulties are not real, but because you have cultivated the inner resources to meet them without being overwhelmed. Seneca wrote that the wise person is like a skilled sailor. The sailor does not control the wind or the waves, but the sailor understands how to work with them, how to adjust the sails, how to steer through rough water. The wise person, similarly, does not control external circumstances, but the wise person understands how to work with circumstances, how to adjust their responses, how to navigate difficulty without being capsized by it. This is the art of letting go. It is not passivity. It is skill. It is the ability to hold things lightly, to respond flexibly, to distinguish between what requires your energy and what does not. It is the wisdom to know when to act and when to release, when to persist and when to accept. And it is the freedom that comes from recognizing that your tranquility does not depend on circumstances aligning with your preferences. It depends on your character, your wisdom, and your practices. And these are always within your control. As we move forward into the next segment, we will continue to build on these foundations. We will explore additional dimensions of Stoic practice, additional ways to cultivate the art of release. But what we have covered here forms the core, the essential understanding that makes everything else possible. The recognition that what we hold onto often holds us. The recognition that we have a choice about what we carry. And the recognition that through practice we can become increasingly skillful at living freely, at releasing what does not serve us, and at carrying only what is truly ours to carry. This is the promise of Stoic philosophy. This is the art of letting go. And it is available to you here and now in this very moment. All that is required is your willingness to begin to practice, to return again and again to these fundamental questions. What am I holding? Is it mine to carry? What might my life be like if I chose to set it down? These questions are not answered once and for all. They are asked again and again, each day, each moment. And each time you ask them, each time you choose to release what is not yours, you are practicing the art. You are living philosophy. You are becoming free. We have spent time considering the distinction between problems and facts, between the burdens that require our action and those that simply require our acceptance. We have explored how the mind so often confuses the two, how we carry weights that were never meant to be lifted, how we exhaust ourselves with struggles against what already is. Now we turn our attention to a deeper layer of this practice, to the subtle ways in which we maintain our grip on what we might otherwise release, to the mechanisms by which we perpetuate our own carrying. There is something paradoxical in the human relationship with burden. We complain of our stress, we speak of being overwhelmed, we describe ourselves as weighed down by worry and responsibility. Yet when offered the opportunity to set something down, we often find ourselves reluctant. We have grown accustomed to the weight. We have organized our identity around what we carry. The thought of releasing it brings not only relief but a strange anxiety, as though without our burdens we might somehow cease to be recognizable to ourselves. Epictetus spoke directly to this tendency. He observed how people become attached even to their sufferings, how they construct elaborate justifications for holding on to what hurts them. He noted that we often prefer the familiar pain to the unfamiliar freedom. The burden we know feels safer than the lightness we can only imagine. This is not weakness or foolishness. It is simply the human preference for the known over the unknown, even when the known is painful and the unknown promises ease. Consider how this manifests in daily life. Someone wrongs you, perhaps through a careless comment or a thoughtless action. The appropriate response might be to address it directly or, if the matter is minor, to simply acknowledge the slight and move on. Yet instead, you find yourself returning to it throughout the day. You replay the moment, refine your interpretation of their intention, rehearse what you might have said or could still say. You carry the interaction with you, adding to it with each repetition, building it into something far heavier than the original moment warranted. Why do we do this? The simple answer is habit. The mind has learned patterns of engagement, and it follows them automatically. But beneath the habit lies something more complex. There is a certain satisfaction in the rehearsal, a feeling of being justified in our displeasure, a sense that by continuing to think about the wrong, we somehow maintain our dignity or assert our worth. We fear that to let it go would be to diminish ourselves, to signal that we do not matter, that our boundaries can be crossed without consequence. This fear reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about what release means. We imagine that letting go of our mental burden is equivalent to condoning the action that created it, that releasing our stress about a situation means we no longer care about the situation itself. This confusion keeps us locked in patterns of carrying that serve no useful purpose. We conflate the emotional weight with the appropriate response. We believe that to stop suffering over something is to stop taking it seriously. The Stoics understood this confusion and addressed it directly. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the difference between responding to events and being controlled by our reactions to them. He noted that we can take appropriate action while remaining internally free, that we can address what needs addressing without becoming enslaved to our emotional response. The emperor dealt with genuine crises, with threats to the empire, with betrayals and losses. Yet he counseled himself repeatedly about the importance of maintaining inner equilibrium regardless of external circumstance. This is not indifference. It is not coldness. It is the recognition that our effectiveness in addressing what matters is diminished, not enhanced, by the weight of our emotional burden. When we carry the stress of a situation beyond what serves its resolution, we do not become more capable or more conscientious. We become less clear, less present, less able to respond appropriately. The weight we carry does not make us stronger. It makes us slower, more rigid, less able to move freely in response to what actually is. Think of it this way. You receive difficult news about your financial situation. There are concrete steps to be taken, adjustments to be made, perhaps difficult conversations to be had. These are real problems requiring real responses. But alongside these necessary actions, the mind generates an entire secondary layer of stress, a constant background anxiety, a stream of worst-case scenarios and self-recriminations. This additional layer does not help you address the practical problems. It does not make you more effective or more responsible. It simply adds weight, makes the necessary work harder to accomplish, clouds your judgment with fear and shame. The work of release, then, is not about ignoring what matters. It is about distinguishing between the response that serves the situation and the burden that serves nothing but our habit of carrying. It is about learning to recognize when we are holding something that needs to be held and when we are simply holding something because we have forgotten how to put it down. This distinction requires practice. The mind does not naturally sort its contents into useful and unnecessary weight. It holds everything with equal tenacity, treating every thought and worry as though it were equally important, equally deserving of attention and energy. Learning to release what does not serve us means developing the capacity to examine what we carry, to question whether each burden is truly ours to bear, whether the way we are holding it actually helps or simply exhausts. Seneca offered a useful framework for this examination. He suggested that we consider not just whether something is difficult, but whether our difficulty with it is productive. He noted that many things are hard in themselves, while others are hard because of how we approach them. A challenging task is difficult by nature. Our rumination about the task, our anxiety about potentially failing at it, our comparison of ourselves to others who might find it easier, these are difficulties we add through our relationship to the challenge, not difficulties inherent in the challenge itself. When we begin to see this distinction clearly, when we start to notice the difference between the weight of circumstances and the weight of our carrying, something shifts in our relationship to stress itself. We realize that much of what exhausts us is not the actual demands of our days, but the way we relate to those demands, the extra layers we add, the stories we tell about what everything means, the comparisons we make, the judgments we layer on top of simple facts. This realization can be disorienting at first. If so much of our stress is self-generated, if we are adding weight unnecessarily, does that mean we have been foolish? Does it mean our suffering has been our own fault? This interpretation, though common, misses the essential point. The patterns by which we carry unnecessary weight are not character flaws. They are learned behaviors, adaptive strategies that once served a purpose, habits formed in response to past circumstances that may no longer be present. Consider a child growing up in an unpredictable environment. Perhaps a parent's mood was volatile, difficult to anticipate. The child learns hypervigilance, learns to monitor constantly for signs of danger, learns to rehearse possible scenarios and prepare responses. This is not foolishness. This is intelligent adaptation to difficult circumstances. The child who develops these patterns is not weak but resourceful, not troubled but responsive to trouble. Yet these adaptive patterns do not automatically dissolve when circumstances change. The adult who grew up monitoring for danger may continue to monitor even in safe environments. The person who learned to rehearse responses to volatility may continue rehearsing even when surrounded by steadiness. The patterns persist because they are deeply learned, because they once protected us, because the nervous system does not distinguish between past necessity and present habit. Understanding this removes the layer of self-judgment that so often accompanies stress. When we recognize that our patterns of carrying are not flaws but adaptations, not choices but learned responses, we can approach the work of release with more patience, more gentleness, more realistic expectations. We are not trying to fix something wrong with ourselves. We are trying to update responses that once served us but may no longer be necessary. This distinction matters because the energy we spend judging ourselves for our stress is itself a form of unnecessary weight. When we carry a burden and simultaneously judge ourselves for carrying it, we double our load. The original stress remains, and now we add the stress of believing we should not be stressed, of thinking we are weak for struggling, of comparing ourselves to some imagined standard of effortless ease. The Stoics were remarkably practical about this. While they counseled the cultivation of inner freedom and equilibrium, they did not pretend that such cultivation was instant or easy. Epictetus compared philosophical practice to athletic training. The athlete does not berate themselves for not being strong before beginning to train. They understand that strength develops through consistent practice, that early attempts will be clumsy, that progress happens gradually through repeated effort. Similarly, the practice of releasing what we do not need to carry is exactly that, a practice. The first 100 times we notice ourselves holding unnecessary weight, we may not know how to set it down. The pattern is strong, the grip automatic, the release unfamiliar. But each time we notice, each time we question whether we need to hold what we are holding, we strengthen a different capacity. We develop the awareness that precedes choice. This awareness is itself the beginning of release. When we carry something unconsciously, we have no option but to continue carrying it. The burden is simply part of our experience, unquestioned and therefore unchangeable. But when we begin to notice what we carry, when we can observe our own patterns of holding, we create a space between the stimulus and the response, between the arising of the burden and our decision about whether to pick it up. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about this space, about the moment between external event and internal response. He reminded himself repeatedly that his judgments about events were his own, that between what happened and how he held it was a gap in which his freedom resided. This gap is not always obvious. Often the judgment feels simultaneous with the event, so quick that we experience them as one thing. Someone cuts us off in traffic, and we are instantly angry. A colleague takes credit for our work, and we are immediately resentful. The event and our response seem to be a single, unified experience. But they are not. There is always a gap, always a moment, however brief, in which perception becomes interpretation, in which fact becomes judgment, in which occurrence becomes burden. The practice is learning to find that gap, to expand it slightly, to dwell in it long enough to recognize that we have a choice about what happens next. Not a choice about what happened, that is beyond our control, but a choice about what we make of it, how we hold it, whether we carry it forward or set it down. This is not about suppressing natural responses. When something difficult happens, the arising of feeling is natural and appropriate. The body responds to threat, to loss, to injustice. Emotions arise as part of our human equipment, part of how we navigate and make sense of our experience. The Stoics did not counsel the elimination of feeling, but rather the examination of what we do with our feelings, how we relate to them, whether we allow them to pass through or construct elaborate structures to maintain them. There is a significant difference between feeling anger and cultivating anger, between experiencing disappointment and building a case for our disappointment. The first is natural, arising and passing like weather. The second is what we add, the story we tell, the evidence we gather, the rehearsal of our grievance. This addition is where unnecessary weight accumulates, where what might have passed through becomes something we carry forward. Learning to recognize this distinction between what naturally arises and what we add through our relationship to it is perhaps the most essential skill in the art of release. It requires a kind of patient observation, a willingness to watch our own minds at work without immediately believing everything we think, without treating every thought as a command or every feeling as a fact requiring action. This observation is not the same as detachment. We are not trying to distance ourselves from our experience or to observe our lives from some removed, uninvolved position. Rather, we are learning to be present to our experience while recognizing that our experience includes both what happens and our interpretation of what happens, both the event and our story about the event. We can feel our feelings fully while also recognizing that our feelings are not the whole truth, not the complete picture, not necessarily the most useful guide to our response. Consider again the example of the colleague who takes credit for your work. The immediate feeling of injustice is natural and appropriate. Something unfair has occurred, but watch what the mind does next. It begins to build. It adds layers. Perhaps it recalls other times this colleague has been less than honest. Perhaps it extends into speculation about their character, their motivations, their opinion of you. Perhaps it moves into self-doubt. Maybe your work was not as good as you thought. Maybe you do not deserve credit. Maybe you are too sensitive about recognition. Each of these additions feels true in the moment. Each one seems to follow naturally from the initial event. But none of them is actually the event itself. They are the mind's activity around the event, the meaning-making and story-building that we do so automatically we barely notice we are doing it. And each addition adds weight, adds complexity, adds another layer of burden to carry. The practice of release begins with recognizing these additions for what they are, not facts but interpretations, not truths but possibilities, not necessities but habits. This recognition does not make them disappear. The mind will continue to generate stories and interpretations. That is its function. But we do not have to believe every story, follow every train of thought, treat every interpretation as gospel truth requiring our complete investment. Seneca described this practice as maintaining a kind of friendly skepticism toward our own certainties. He noted how quickly the mind moves from observation to judgment, from fact to interpretation, from what is to what it means. He counseled the practice of pausing at this transition, of noticing when we are moving from direct experience to our story about experience, of holding our interpretations lightly enough to examine them before fully embracing them. This pause is not natural to us. The mind moves quickly and for good reason. In many situations, rapid interpretation serves survival. The rustle in the bushes might be wind or might be danger, and the organism that pauses to carefully evaluate every interpretation does not fare well. We are descended from those who judged quickly, who leaned toward caution, who treated ambiguous signals as potential threats. This inheritance serves us in some circumstances. But in the realm of daily stress, in our response to the countless minor difficulties and frustrations of ordinary life, this rapid judgment often adds suffering without adding safety. We do not need to treat every difficulty as a crisis requiring immediate, total response. We do not need to transform every frustration into evidence of some larger problem. We do not need to take every uncomfortable feeling as a sign that something must be urgently addressed. Yet our inherited tendency is to do exactly this, to escalate, to magnify, to treat everything as potentially significant, potentially dangerous, potentially requiring our full defensive attention. The art of release involves learning to sort what actually requires response from what simply requires acknowledgement. It means developing the capacity to feel something uncomfortable without immediately needing to fix it, explain it, or defend against it. It means allowing our experience to be what it is without constantly adding our commentary, our judgment, our story about what it means. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by the genuine pressures of imperial responsibility, understood this distinction intimately. He faced real threats, real decisions with significant consequences. Yet he counseled himself repeatedly to meet each situation with presence rather than with the accumulated weight of all his other concerns. He reminded himself that adding anxiety to a difficult situation did not make it easier to address, that multiplying his worries did not multiply his effectiveness. His practice was to return continually to the present reality, to what actually required his attention in this moment rather than the dozens of other concerns clamoring for mental space. He wrote about this not as someone who had mastered it completely but as someone actively working with the challenge, reminding himself of what he knew because the forgetting was constant, the tendency to accumulate burden was persistent. This is important to remember. The Stoic philosophers were not describing a state they had permanently achieved, but rather a practice they continually engaged. Their writings are not reports from the summit but field notes from the climb. They struggled with the same tendencies we struggle with: the rush to judgment, the multiplication of worry, the habit of carrying more than necessary. Their wisdom lies not in their having transcended these patterns, but in their having developed useful ways of working with them. When we understand this, the philosophical guidance becomes more accessible, more usable. We are not trying to achieve some perfect state of burden-free existence. We are learning to work more skillfully with the inevitable difficulties of human life, to carry what must be carried without adding unnecessary weight, to distinguish between the challenges inherent in living and the challenges we add through our relationship to living. This work of distinguishing asks something of us that is both simple and difficult. It asks that we pay attention, not dramatic attention, not the forced concentration of trying very hard to focus. Rather, the gentle, sustained attention of someone genuinely curious about their own experience, interested in how the mind works, willing to observe the patterns by which we create and maintain our burdens. Such attention reveals that much of our mental burden involves time confusion. We carry past events into the present moment, rehearsing what happened, refining our interpretation, wishing it had gone differently. We carry future possibilities into the present moment, rehearsing what might happen, preparing for difficulties that may never arrive, protecting ourselves against scenarios we have imagined. In both cases, we are adding the weight of other times to the present, treating as current what is either finished or not yet real. The present moment, when we actually arrive in it, is almost always more manageable than the version of it we carry in our minds. The present moment contains only what is actually happening right now, only what actually requires response right now. It does not include all our history with similar situations, all our fears about where this situation might lead, all our judgments about what it means that this situation is occurring. Those additions are what we bring. They are how we turn a manageable present into an overwhelming burden. Epictetus taught his students to practice distinguishing between their direct experience and their judgments about their experience. He would ask them to describe situations using only factual observation, without interpretation, without story. This is remarkably difficult. We are so accustomed to experiencing the world through our interpretive layer that we often cannot separate what we observe from what we think about what we observe. Try it now with something from your own recent experience. Think of a moment today that generated some stress or difficulty. Now try to describe it using only observable facts, without interpretation. What actually happened, not what it meant, not what it revealed, not how it made you feel about yourself or others, but simply what occurred. You will likely find that the factual description is brief and relatively neutral. The stress, the burden, comes primarily from the layers of meaning and implication we have added. This does not make the stress illegitimate. Our interpretations matter. Meaning matters. How we understand and make sense of our experience is part of being human. but recognizing how much of our burden comes from our interpretive layer rather than from events themselves gives us somewhere to work. We cannot always change what happens. We can develop a different relationship to our interpretations, our stories, our meaning-making activity. Part of what makes this work challenging is that our interpretations do not feel like interpretations. They feel like truth, like simply seeing clearly what is happening. Someone speaks to us in a certain tone, and we know they are annoyed. A message goes unanswered, and we know the person is avoiding us. Project faces difficulties, and we know we have failed. These knowings feel certain, feel like direct perception rather than interpretation. Yet they are interpretations. They may be accurate interpretations. Often our intuitions about such things are reasonably reliable. But they remain interpretations, one possible reading among others. The annoyed tone might reflect the other person's stress about something unrelated. The unanswered message might result from their busy day rather than their feelings about us. The project difficulty might be a normal part of the process rather than evidence of our inadequacy. The practice is not to deny our interpretations or pretend we do not make them. It is to hold them lightly enough to examine them, to recognize them as interpretations rather than as certainties, to remain open to the possibility that other readings might be equally or more accurate. This lightness of holding prevents our interpretations from solidifying into burdens we must defend, positions we must maintain, stories we must prove true. Seneca wrote about this in his letters, describing how much of our suffering comes from our commitment to our interpretations, our need to be right about what things mean. He noted that we often prefer to be right about something painful than to be free of the pain. We would rather prove that we were truly wronged than discover we might have misunderstood. We would rather confirm that we should be worried than find out our worry was unnecessary. Our investment in our interpretation becomes greater than our desire for ease. This is not perversity. It reflects something important about how we construct our sense of reality and ourselves. Our interpretations are not arbitrary. They arise from our history, our temperament, our learned patterns of making sense of the world. To question them can feel like questioning ourselves, like losing our grip on what is real and true. There is a deep resistance to releasing our interpretations precisely because they feel like how we know anything at all. Yet this is where the practice of release becomes most transformative. When we can hold our interpretations lightly, when we can recognize them as one possible reading rather than as the truth, we gain an extraordinary freedom. We are no longer trapped by our first interpretation, no longer required to defend our initial reading, no longer burdened by the need to make our experience conform to our story about it. This freedom does not mean we become uncertain about everything, unable to judge or decide. It means we remain open, responsive, able to adjust our understanding as new information arrives. It means we carry our views and interpretations as tools for navigating experience rather than as rigid structures we must defend. It means we can be wrong without it threatening our fundamental sense of ourselves. There is a particular quality of burden that comes from our relationship with other people, from the complex web of expectations and obligations that accompany human connection. We carry others' opinions of us, or what we imagine their opinions to be. We carry responsibility for their feelings, for their responses, for their experience of us. We carry the weight of wanting to be understood, to be appreciated, to be seen accurately. This interpersonal burden forms a significant portion of our daily stress. The Stoics had much to say about this particular form of carrying. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself frequently that he could not control what others thought of him, how they interpreted his actions, what meanings they made of his choices. He noted that people would judge him according to their own natures, their own preoccupations, their own needs and fears. He could not prevent this, could not manage it, could not ensure that their perception matched his intention. This recognition did not make him indifferent to others. His writings show deep care for the empire and its people, genuine concern for justice and the common good. But he worked to separate his care for others from his need for their approval, his commitment to right action from his investment in how that action was received. He could act according to his best judgment while releasing his attachment to others' interpretation of those actions. This is difficult for most of us. We are social creatures, evolved to care deeply about our standing in the group, our reputation, how we are perceived and received. The person who truly does not care at all what others think is not free but isolated, cut off from the feedback and connection that makes cooperation and community possible. The goal is not to eliminate our awareness of others' perceptions, but to find a way to remain responsive to feedback without being enslaved to the need for approval. The distinction rests on recognizing the difference between others' perceptions and our responsibility for those perceptions. Someone may be disappointed in us, may judge us harshly, may misunderstand our intentions. These are facts about their experience. But their experience, however real and valid for them, is not necessarily an accurate measure of our character or choices. They are responding to their interpretation of our actions, filtered through their own history and needs, shaped by factors we cannot see and cannot control. We can care about their experience without making it the ultimate arbiter of our worth. We can listen to their perspective without treating it as definitive truth. We can consider whether their response reveals something useful, some blind spot or mistake on our part, while also recognizing that their response primarily reveals something about them, about how they make sense of things, about what matters to them and why. Epictetus used a useful distinction here. He talked about the difference between our actions, which are within our control, and the reception of our actions, which is not. We can control whether we speak truthfully, but we cannot control whether others believe us. We can control whether we act with integrity, but we cannot control whether others recognize our integrity. We can control our effort and intention, but we cannot control the outcomes that follow from them or others' interpretation of those outcomes. When we try to control what is not ours to control, when we make ourselves responsible for others' perceptions and reactions, we take on a burden that cannot be successfully carried. We will exhaust ourselves trying to manage what we cannot manage, trying to ensure a response we cannot ensure, trying to be perceived in a way that depends entirely on the inner workings of someone else's mind. This does not mean we become careless about our impact on others. We can take responsibility for our actions, for treating people with respect, for considering the likely effects of our choices. But there is a difference between considering impact and trying to control reception. We can think carefully about how we communicate something difficult, choosing words and timing thoughtfully. But we cannot ensure that the person receives it well, that they understand it as we meant it, that they respond in the way we hope. Releasing this particular burden, the weight of others' perceptions, requires a kind of trust. We must trust that we can survive others' misunderstanding, that our worth does not depend on unanimous approval, that we can be judged unfairly without it destroying us. This trust is not arrogance. It is not certainty that we are always right and others always wrong. It is simply the recognition that we cannot build our sense of ourselves entirely on the foundation of others' opinions, that such a foundation is too unstable, too subject to forces beyond our control. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this extensively, noting how differently various people would interpret the same action. Some would see wisdom where others saw weakness. Some would see confidence where others saw arrogance. Some would see care where others saw intrusion. The action remained the same, but the interpretation varied according to the interpreter. He concluded that if he made his peace depend on universal approval, he would never have peace, because universal approval was impossible. People see things differently. Their different seeing says more about them than about what they see. This realization can be both liberating and lonely. It is liberating because it releases us from the exhausting work of trying to be all things to all people, trying to shape ourselves into whatever we imagine others want us to be. It is lonely because it means accepting that we will be misunderstood, that perfect understanding between people is rare and perhaps impossible, that we must live with the gap between our experience of ourselves and others' experience of us. Yet this loneliness, fully accepted, becomes a kind of freedom. When we stop trying to close the gap, stop exhausting ourselves with explanations and justifications, stop needing others to see us exactly as we see ourselves, we can meet them more directly. We can be curious about how they see things without needing to correct their view. We can hear their interpretation without treating it as verdict. We can allow the natural diversity of human perception without making it a problem to be solved. Another significant source of daily burden comes from our relationship to our own past, to the choices we have made and cannot unmake, to the roads not taken, to the versions of ourselves we might have become but did not. We carry regret, sometimes for clear mistakes, sometimes for choices that seemed right at the time but led to unexpected difficulties, sometimes simply for the paths we did not choose because we could not choose everything. This form of burden is particularly stubborn because it involves what cannot be changed. The past is fixed, immutable, beyond our power to alter. Yet the mind returns to it repeatedly, as if enough analysis might somehow revise what happened, as if sufficient regret might undo what was done. We replay past moments, reimagine them, think about what we should have said or done differently. We carry the weight of unchangeable history forward into each present moment. Seneca wrote pointedly about this tendency, calling it one of the primary ways we waste our limited time. He noted that we treat the past as though it still belonged to us, as though we could still do something with it beyond learn from it. He counseled that while reflection on the past could be useful for gaining wisdom, rumination about what cannot be changed was simply a way of extending past suffering into the present unnecessarily. The distinction between useful reflection and unnecessary rumination is important. Useful reflection examines the past to understand it better, to see patterns, to learn what might be done differently in the future. It is oriented toward growth and adjustment. Unnecessary rumination, on the other hand, simply circles through the same material repeatedly, without producing insight, without leading anywhere but back to itself. It is thinking as a form of self-punishment, not thinking as a form of learning. Most of us can recognize the difference in our own experience. Useful reflection feels like it is going somewhere, like it is helping us understand something we did not understand before. Unnecessary rumination feels stuck, feels like we are covering the same ground again and again without arriving anywhere new. Yet knowing the difference does not automatically free us from the pattern. The mind returns to its familiar grooves, and rumination is one of the deepest grooves we carve. Why do we return so persistently to what cannot be changed? Part of the answer lies in our deep discomfort with powerlessness. To accept that something is unchangeable is to accept that we are not in control, that some things lie beyond our power to fix or manage. The mind resists this acceptance. It prefers the illusion of potential control, even if that control exists only in our endless mental revision of what happened. There is also something in us that believes suffering over our mistakes somehow makes up for them, that if we just feel bad enough about what we did wrong, We will somehow balance the scales, restore justice, make amends through our self-punishment. This belief is rarely conscious or articulated. We would probably disagree with it if someone stated it directly. Yet our behavior reveals its presence. We return to our regrets as though our continued suffering serves some useful purpose beyond the suffering itself. The Stoic response to this pattern is not to suppress regret or pretend past mistakes do not matter. It is to redirect the energy we spend on regret toward amendment where amendment is possible. If we have wronged someone, we can make amends directly. If we have developed an unhealthy pattern, we can work to change it. If we have neglected something important, we can return our attention to it now. These are actions in the present that respond to the past without being trapped in it. But much of what we regret cannot be directly amended. The relationship that ended badly cannot be restored if the other person is no longer available or interested. The opportunity that we missed is gone. The version of ourselves we might have become if we had made different choices does not exist and will not exist. These are facts, and our continued suffering over them changes nothing about them. Marcus Aurelius counseled accepting such facts with the same equanimity we might bring to any other aspect of nature. The past, once it has occurred, becomes as fixed as the mountains, as unchangeable as our height or the family we were born into. We do not waste energy wishing we were taller or had different parents, though we might idly wish such things occasionally. We recognize that these facts are simply part of our condition, the givens within which we live. The past, from this perspective, is simply another given. It is the particular set of circumstances that have shaped us, the specific history that has formed our current moment. We did not get to choose it. Even the parts that came from our choices are now beyond our choosing. They are simply what happened, the material from which we continue. This acceptance is not resignation. It does not mean we approve of everything that happened or pretend that all outcomes are equally good. It means we recognize that our approval or disapproval of the past, our wishing it had been different, our regret over what occurred changes nothing about what occurred. The past remains exactly as it was regardless of how we feel about it. Our only choice is whether to carry our feelings about it forward or to acknowledge the past and turn our attention to what can actually be affected, which is only ever the present moment. This turn from past to present is not a one-time accomplishment, but a repeated practice. The mind will return to its familiar regrets, will pick up the old burdens, will begin again to rehearse what cannot be changed. Each time the practice is the same. Notice the return, acknowledge what the mind is doing, and redirect attention to what is actually available for response. Not harshly, not with frustration at ourselves for wandering again, but with the same patience we might show a distracted child, gently bringing attention back to what is actually here. Just as we carry our past forward unnecessarily, we also burden ourselves with the future, with all the things that might happen, that could go wrong, that we need to prepare for or prevent. This anticipatory burden is in some ways even more consuming than regret, because while the past is at least fixed and knowable, the future is open, undefined, containing infinite possibilities for difficulty and disaster. The mind is designed to anticipate, to plan, to prepare for what might be coming. This capacity has obvious survival value. The person who never considers the future, who never prepares or plans, will likely encounter preventable difficulties. But there is a difference between useful preparation and anxious projection, between planning for likely scenarios and spinning elaborate stories about everything that might possibly go wrong. Seneca dedicated considerable attention to this distinction, particularly in his letters on anxiety and fear. He noted how often we suffer in advance for things that never actually occur, how we multiply our pain by experiencing it not only when it happens but in every moment we anticipate it happening. He observed that many things trouble us more in prospect than in reality, that our imagination of difficulty is often worse than the actual experience of it. This is not to say that we should ignore potential problems. Some difficulties can be prevented or mitigated through advanced planning. Some risks can be reduced through careful preparation. The Stoics were not advocates of careless spontaneity or reckless disregard for consequences. They were advocates of preparation without projection, of planning without the anxious weight of treating every possibility as equally likely and equally catastrophic. The practice they recommended, premeditatio malorum, involved deliberately thinking through potential difficulties, not to anxiety about them, but to prepare for them. The idea was to consider clearly what might go wrong so that if it did go wrong, you would not be completely unprepared, would not be shocked into paralysis. But this consideration was meant to be brief, practical, oriented toward preparation rather than toward endless elaboration of worst-case scenarios. There is a clear difference between these two approaches. Useful preparation asks, what might happen and what would I do about it? This is a practical question with practical answers. You identify likely difficulties, consider appropriate responses, perhaps take some concrete steps to prevent or prepare. Then you are done. You have prepared, and additional mental attention serves no useful purpose. Anxious projection, on the other hand, asks, what might happen, and how terrible would that be? This question has no bottom. No matter how many terrible scenarios you imagine, there are always more. No matter how thoroughly you consider the awfulness of each possibility, you can always consider it more thoroughly. This form of future-oriented thinking is not preparation. It is simply suffering in advance, and it exhausts us without making us more ready for actual difficulty when it arrives. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself repeatedly to stay with what was actually happening rather than with all the things that might happen. He noted that the present moment, taken by itself, was almost always manageable, that it was only when he added the weight of past and future to it that it became overwhelming. He counseled himself to confine his attention to the task at hand, the decision before him, the single step he was actually taking rather than the entire journey he imagined ahead. This confinement of attention is not narrowness or short-sightedness. It is recognizing that we can only ever act in the present, that future actions will be taken in their own present moments when they arrive, that trying to take them in advance through worry and planning is not actually taking them at all. It is simply adding the weight of imagined future to the present, making the present harder to navigate by filling it with ghosts of what is not yet here. Consider how this works in ordinary experience. You have a difficult conversation coming tomorrow. There is some value in thinking about it briefly, considering what you want to communicate, what the key points are, what response you hope for. This is useful preparation. But notice what happens if you continue to think about it beyond this point. You start imagining how the other person might respond. You begin preparing responses to their imagined responses. You consider all the ways it might go badly. You rehearse defenses, justifications, explanations for various scenarios. The alternative is to prepare briefly, then release the future back to the future. Acknowledge that you do not know how the conversation will go. You have done what you can to prepare, and the rest will be determined by factors you cannot control: the other person's mood and perspective, the dynamic that actually emerges, the surprises and unexpected elements that no amount of rehearsal can anticipate. You can meet these factors when they actually arise, responding to what is actually happening rather than to what you imagined would happen. This release of the future is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the practice of letting go, because it feels like we are releasing control, releasing our power to influence outcomes. But we never had that control. We cannot control future events through worry and rumination. We can only take appropriate action in the present and then wait to see what the present becomes, what the future actually brings when it arrives and transforms into now. This understanding that release enhances rather than diminishes our capacity for appropriate response is central to the entire practice. We are not learning to let go so that we can disengage or withdraw. We are learning to let go so that we can be more fully present, more available, more responsive to what actually requires our attention and action. We are clearing away the unnecessary weight so that we can carry well what is actually ours to carry. This is the heart of the practice, the center toward which all these considerations point. We arrive now at a place of integration, where the philosophical principles we have been exploring begin to show themselves in the texture of everyday life. It is one thing to understand the distinction between problems and facts, between what is ours to carry and what is not. It is another thing entirely to live this understanding when the morning alarm sounds, when the inbox fills, when the day presents its countless small frictions and larger challenges. This is where philosophy proves its worth, not in the abstract contemplation of principles, but in the quiet moments when we must decide what to hold and what to release. The Stoics were deeply practical philosophers. They did not write merely to create elegant systems of thought, though their systems were indeed elegant. They wrote to help people live better lives in the midst of difficulty. Marcus Aurelius composed his meditations not as a public treatise but as private reminders to himself, an emperor grappling with war, plague, betrayal, and the enormous weight of responsibility. Epictetus taught students who would go out into a complex Roman world where they would face real challenges. Seneca wrote letters to friends navigating grief, political danger, and the universal human struggles that time has not diminished. Their wisdom was forged in the same fires we encounter, and it remains practical precisely because it addresses not ideal circumstances but actual life as it unfolds. When we speak of applying Stoic wisdom to the release of daily stress and burdens, we are speaking of something quite specific. We are not simply adopting a positive attitude or deciding to worry less. We are engaging in a practice of discernment that requires both clarity and courage. Clarity to see what actually lies before us, what is within our power and what is not. Courage to release what we have been holding that was never ours to carry. This practice begins with attention. Consider the ordinary morning. You wake, and before your feet touch the floor, thoughts begin their familiar procession. Worries about outcomes you cannot control. Rehearsals of conversations that may never happen. Regrets about words already spoken. The mind, left to its own devices, will gather burdens the way a wool coat gathers snow in a storm. Each thought seems small, justified, necessary. Collectively, they weigh us down before the day has truly begun. The Stoic practice here is not to suppress these thoughts or pretend they do not arise. It is to meet them with discernment. As each thought appears, we might pause and ask a simple question that Epictetus would recognize immediately. Is this within my control or is it not? This question is not rhetorical. It requires an honest answer, and that answer determines what we do next. If the thought concerns something genuinely within our power, something we can address through our choices and actions today, then it deserves our attention. We note it, we consider what action it calls for, and we plan accordingly. This is responsible engagement with life, not avoidance of duty. But if the thought concerns something outside our control, something that depends on circumstances, on other people's choices, on outcomes we cannot determine, then we practice release. Not with force or frustration, but with the calm recognition that carrying this thought serves no purpose. It does not help. It does not protect. It does not prepare. It only burdens. And we are allowed, by the very structure of reality and the wisdom of those who have thought deeply about that structure, to set it down. This is easier described than done, of course. The mind does not easily release what it has become accustomed to carrying. We have habits of worry, patterns of mental rehearsal that feel almost like duty. To release them can feel irresponsible, as though we are abandoning vigilance or care. But this is a misunderstanding of what release means in the Stoic sense. We are not releasing care. We are releasing the illusion that mental agitation serves care. The Stoic practice invites us to examine what is actually within our control in this situation. You can control your preparation. You can review relevant information, clarify your own thoughts, consider what you genuinely believe should happen and why. You can control your speech in the meeting, the care you take to express yourself clearly and listen attentively. You can control your conduct, your professionalism, your willingness to be flexible where flexibility serves the larger good. These are real areas of control, and attention to them is well spent. It is preparation, and preparation has value. But you cannot control how your words will be received. You cannot control the mood your colleague brings to the conversation, the pressures they face from elsewhere, the decision that will ultimately be made. You cannot control whether the outcome will be what you hope for. You cannot control whether others will be reasonable, whether they will see what seems obvious to you, whether they will value what you value. These things depend on countless factors beyond your power, factors that remain beyond your power no matter how much mental energy you direct toward them. The stress you feel, the tension in your chest, comes largely from attempting to control what cannot be controlled. It comes from carrying not just your own responsibility to prepare and participate well, but also the impossible burden of determining outcomes that do not rest with you alone. The practice, then, is to notice this distinction while it is happening, to feel the tension and ask what you are trying to control that you cannot, to release consciously and deliberately the burden of outcomes, and to return your attention to what is actually yours: your preparation, your conduct, your ability to speak truthfully and listen openly. This release does not mean you do not care about the outcome. It means you recognize that caring about it and attempting to control it through worry are two entirely different things. You can care deeply about what happens while simultaneously releasing the burden of trying to determine it through mental agitation. In fact, you will likely participate more effectively if you do, because you will not be carrying unnecessary weight into the room with you. You will be lighter, clearer, more present to what is actually happening rather than to what you have been imagining might happen. This same principle extends to countless daily situations. The commute where traffic moves slowly and you cannot control the pace. The message you sent that has not yet received a response, where you cannot control when or whether someone will reply. The decision someone else is making that affects you, where you cannot control their thinking or their choice. The weather on a day when you had outdoor plans. The mood of someone you live with or work beside. The larger circumstances in your field of work, in the economy, in the health of people you love. These are realities you meet, facts you encounter, but they are not yours to control. And the attempt to control them through worry, through mental rehearsal, through the illusion that sufficient anxiety might influence outcomes, serves only to burden you. The Stoic practice is to meet each of these situations with the same clear question: what here is within my control? And then to direct attention there, fully and without remainder. If traffic is slow, I control my response. I can use the time to think, to listen to something worthwhile, to practice patience as a skill worth developing. I cannot make the traffic move, but I can decline to add mental agitation to the simple fact of slow movement. If someone has not replied to my message, I control whether I send a follow-up if that is appropriate, and I control whether I use the waiting time for other purposes. I cannot control their timeline or their priorities, and attempting to do so through worry accomplishes nothing but my own disquiet. The practice of release in these moments is subtle but transformative. It does not require dramatic gestures or significant time. It requires a moment of recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of what is and is not yours, and a deliberate choice to set down what you cannot carry anyway. This choice can happen in a single breath. You notice the worry, you identify what you are attempting to control that you cannot, and you release it, not by forcing it away, but by recognizing its futility and choosing to direct your attention elsewhere, to something you can actually address. Seneca offers us a helpful image when he writes about the person who carries every burden, real and imagined, until they can scarcely move. Such a person, he suggests, resembles someone who insists on carrying not just their own pack but the packs of everyone they meet, whether those people have asked for help or not. The weight becomes unbearable, not because any single pack is too heavy, but because we were never meant to carry them all. The practice of release is the practice of carrying only what is yours, what is genuinely within your power and responsibility, and allowing others to carry theirs. This is not callousness. It is clarity about the boundaries of your agency and the respect for others that comes from acknowledging their own. This principle applies with particular force to what we might call the burdens of expectation. We carry many things that others have placed on us, or that we imagine they have placed on us. Expectations about how we should behave, what we should achieve, who we should be. Some of these expectations are real. Some are imagined. Some are reasonable. Some are not. The Stoic practice is to examine them with the same clear eye we bring to every other burden. Is this expectation one I share? Does it align with what I understand to be good and worthwhile? Is meeting it within my power? If the answer is yes to these questions, then the expectation becomes simply a goal, something to work toward with whatever skill and effort I can bring. There is no burden in this, only purposeful action. But if the expectation does not align with what I understand to be good, or if meeting it is not within my power because it depends on factors I cannot control, then I am allowed to release it. I am allowed to recognize that someone else's disappointment, while perhaps unfortunate, is not something I can prevent if preventing it requires me to be other than I am or to control what I cannot control. This is a difficult practice because we are social beings who care about how we are perceived and whether we are valued by others. The Stoics did not deny this care. They simply insisted that it should not rule us, that our peace should not depend on meeting every expectation that comes our way, reasonable or not. Consider the situation of someone who has worked diligently on a project, brought their full attention and skill to it, and then presented it to others for evaluation. The work is done. It represents their best effort given the time, resources, and understanding they had. Now it will be judged by others, and those judgments will be influenced by countless factors. The evaluator's own pressures and priorities, their personal preferences, their understanding of the larger context, their mood on that particular day. Factors both visible and invisible, most of which the person who created the work cannot know and certainly cannot control. The Stoic practice here is to recognize what was within control and what was not. The quality of the work itself, the care taken in its creation, the integrity of the effort, these were within control and they were honored. The response of others, while important to note and learn from, is not within control in the same way. It depends on too many variables that exist outside the boundary of your agency. The practice, then, is to release the burden of that response while remaining open to it. You can listen to feedback without carrying the weight of needing it to be positive. You can learn from criticism without being defined by it. You can feel disappointed if the response is not what you hoped, while simultaneously recognizing that you did what was yours to do, and what follows is not yours in the same sense. This distinction between doing our part and controlling outcomes runs through all Stoic teaching, and its practical application brings immediate relief. So much of our daily stress comes from attempting to manage what cannot be managed, from taking responsibility for results that depend on factors we do not command. When we release this impossible responsibility and return our attention to what is genuinely ours, our choices, our efforts, our responses, our character, we discover that we have more than enough to attend to without carrying what belongs elsewhere. Another area where practical Stoic wisdom serves us well is in the release of past events. We carry, often without realizing it, a great weight of things that have already happened. Mistakes we made, opportunities we missed, words we wish we had said or wish we had not said, ways we were treated that felt unjust, outcomes that disappointed us. These events are complete. They exist now only as memories, as mental objects we can examine or ignore, but they are not happening anymore. They cannot be changed, amended, or undone. Yet we carry them as though they were current burdens requiring current action. The Stoic perspective on past events is straightforward, though living it requires practice. What has happened has happened. It is now a fact as fixed as any fact of geography or history. We can learn from it, and we should. We can make amends where amends are possible and appropriate. We can change our future behavior based on what the past has taught us. All of this is within our control, and all of it is worthwhile. But we cannot change the event itself, and we cannot carry it as an active burden without cost to our present peace and future effectiveness. Epictetus points out that we often disturb ourselves not by what happened, but by our judgment about what happened. The event itself is complete. What remains is our interpretation, our story about what it meant, our insistence that it should have been otherwise. This insistence is where the burden lives. Not in the fact of what happened, but in our resistance to the fact, our continued argument with reality about what should have been. The practice of release in relation to the past is the practice of allowing what happened to be what it was, without continuing to argue with it, without continuing to carry it as though it might still be changed. This is not the same as pretending the past does not matter or that harmful things were not harmful. The Stoics were not engaged in denial. They simply recognized that accepting what has happened, acknowledging it fully as fact, is the only position from which we can move forward effectively. If I continue to insist that something that happened should not have happened, I am arguing with reality, and reality is indifferent to my arguments. The event remains as it was. The only thing my resistance accomplishes is my own continued disturbance. If instead I can acknowledge what happened, learn what it has to teach, and then release the burden of wishing it were otherwise, I become free to act in the present with clarity rather than being weighed down by an unchangeable past. A practical example might help. Suppose you said something in a conversation some time ago, something you now regret. Perhaps it was unkind or simply clumsy, and it affected how someone perceived you or how the relationship proceeded. You have thought about it many times since. You have replayed the conversation, imagined what you wish you had said instead, felt the discomfort of the mistake. This is natural. We are creatures capable of reflection, and reflection on our mistakes is part of how we learn and grow. But there comes a point where continued reflection becomes simply carrying a burden that serves no purpose. You have learned what the situation had to teach. You understand now what you did not understand then. Perhaps you have apologized or made what amends were possible. Perhaps the opportunity for amends has passed. Either way, the event is complete, cannot be changed. What remains is your willingness to continue carrying it or to set it down. The Stoic practice is to examine honestly what still needs to be done, if anything. If there is an action available to you now that would appropriately address what happened, then that action is yours to consider. But if no such action exists, if what happened is simply part of the past now, then carrying the weight of it serves neither you nor anyone else. The practice is to acknowledge the fact, to hold what it taught you, and to release the burden of wishing it had been different. This is not forgetting. It is accepting. It is allowing what was to be what it was, and choosing to live in the present rather than in a past that no longer exists except in memory. The same principle applies to events done to you rather than by you. Things others said or did that affected you. Circumstances that unfolded in ways that felt unfair or difficult. Here too, the Stoic practice is one of acceptance as the foundation of release. Not acceptance that implies approval, but acceptance that acknowledges fact. This happened. It is part of the story now. Cannot change it. What I can change is whether I continue to carry it as an active burden, whether I allow it to occupy mental space that might be used for present attention and future action. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayals and disappointments that would test anyone. People he trusted acted against him. Circumstances he hoped would unfold one way went another. Yet he returns repeatedly in his writings to the practice of accepting what is, of not adding to the difficulties of life the additional burden of insisting they should not be difficulties. He asks himself what good it does to be angry at events or people for being what they are. The anger changes nothing about what happened. It only disturbs his own mind and reduces his ability to respond wisely to what is actually before him. The evening practice we discussed earlier serves this release of the past particularly well. When we review the day, we are not cataloging failures to feel bad about or successes to cling to. We are examining what happened with calm attention, learning what we can, and then allowing the day to be complete. What went well, we can be grateful for and perhaps repeat. What went poorly, we can understand and perhaps do differently tomorrow. But then we release it. The day is over. It has joined the past, that realm of fact that cannot be altered. We allow it to rest there, and we ourselves rest, unburdened by the weight of trying to change what has already been. There is also the matter of releasing the burdens we carry on behalf of others, a particularly subtle but heavy form of weight. We care about people in our lives. We want them to be well, to make good choices, to avoid unnecessary suffering. This care is natural and good, but it can transform into something that does not serve either them or us, a kind of carrying of their lives as though they were our responsibility to manage. We worry about their decisions. We feel distressed by their struggles. We attempt to solve their problems, sometimes before they have asked us to. We carry anxiety about their futures, about paths they are taking that we think are unwise. All of this comes from love or care, but it becomes burden nonetheless. The Stoic practice here requires careful discernment. We are social creatures, and part of living well involves genuine care for others and appropriate action on their behalf. The question is not whether to care, but how to care without taking on burdens that are not ours to carry. Epictetus reminds us that each person has their own faculty of choice, their own capacity for reason and decision. This capacity is theirs, not ours. We can offer perspective, share our thinking, provide help when it is wanted and when providing it is within our power. But we cannot choose for others, and we cannot carry the weight of their choices as though those choices were ours. This becomes particularly acute in relationships with adult children, with partners, with close friends, anyone whose well-being matters to us and whose life we can see clearly enough to have opinions about. We watch them make choices we think are mistaken. We see them struggle with difficulties we think they could avoid. We know or believe we know what would serve them better. And because we care, we carry anxiety about what they are doing or not doing. We lose sleep over their situations. We feel responsible for outcomes in their lives that are not within our power to determine. The practice is to return to the fundamental Stoic recognition. What is within my control here? I can control whether I am available to listen if they want to talk. I can control whether I offer perspective if they ask for it. I can control whether I provide specific help if specific help is requested, and if providing it does not harm my own capacity to live well. I can control my own conduct toward them, my kindness, my patience, my willingness to be present. These are real and valuable. They are what I have to offer, and they are enough. But I cannot control their choices. I cannot control what they do with what I offer. I cannot control whether they learn what I think they need to learn, whether they avoid what I think they should avoid, whether their lives unfold as I believe would be best. These things are theirs, part of their own story, shaped by their own faculty of choice and by countless circumstances beyond anyone's complete control. To carry anxiety about them is to attempt to control what cannot be controlled. It serves neither them nor me. It only adds my unnecessary suffering to whatever they may actually be experiencing. This does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. The Stoics valued appropriate affection and relationship. Marcus Aurelius wrote with deep feeling about people he loved. But he also practiced distinguishing between care and control, between genuine help and the illusion that worry serves as help. We can care deeply while simultaneously releasing the burden of responsibility for another person's path. We can remain available, remain kind, remain genuinely engaged, while recognizing that their life is theirs to live, not ours to manage. A helpful question in these situations is simply this: is there a specific action available to me right now that would genuinely help? If yes, then I can consider whether taking that action is appropriate and within my capacity. If I decide it is, I take it. If I decide it is not, I do not. But either way, I then release the worry. I have done what was mine to do, or I have appropriately declined to do what was not mine to do. What happens next is not within my control, and carrying anxiety about it serves no one. This is care without burden. This is love without the weight of impossible responsibility. The same principle extends to larger situations in the world, matters of public concern, social issues, events in the news that trouble us. Here too, we must practice discernment about what is ours to carry and what is not. We live in a time of remarkable connectivity, where we can know about difficulties and injustices far beyond our immediate sphere. This knowledge can be valuable. It can inform our choices about how to allocate resources, how to vote, what causes to support, how to live in ways that align with our values. But it can also become an impossible burden if we attempt to carry personal responsibility for every difficult thing we become aware of. There is also practical wisdom in recognizing the rhythm of engagement and release. We cannot maintain constant attention to everything at once. Even within the sphere of what is genuinely ours to address, there is value in periods of release, times when we step back from active problem solving and allow ourselves simply to be, to rest, to attend to life in its more immediate and personal dimensions. This is not neglect of duty. It is the recognition that we are finite beings with limited energy, and that we serve our responsibilities better when we also honor our need for rest and release. The Stoics lived in a world without the constant connectivity we experience, but they understood the principle. Seneca writes about the importance of withdrawal, of time set apart from the demands of public life and responsibility, not to abandon those demands but to return to them with renewed capacity. He suggests that we need periods where we are not trying to accomplish anything, not trying to solve anything, but simply allowing ourselves to exist without the weight of constant purpose. These periods of release are not wasted time. They are the necessary rhythm of a sustainable life. In practical terms, this means creating deliberate boundaries around when and how we engage with demands and information. It means having times of day or days of the week when we are not checking messages, not reviewing problems, not taking on new burdens. It means recognizing that availability is not the same as duty, that we can care about our work and our responsibilities while also stepping away from them completely at times. This stepping away is not irresponsible. It is the necessary practice of release that allows us to return with clarity rather than exhaustion. Consider the common experience of checking work messages in the evening or on weekends. There is often a sense that we should be available, that problems might arise that need our attention, that staying connected is part of being responsible. Sometimes this is true. Some roles genuinely require availability at unusual times. But often, the checking is more habit than necessity, more anxiety than duty. We check because we carry the burden of wondering what might be there, and checking seems to offer relief from that wondering. But of course, checking often creates new burdens, new things to think about, new worries to carry. The Stoic practice is to examine whether this constant availability actually serves anyone, including ourselves. Is there a genuine need for immediate response, or is there simply a habit of constant connection? If there is no genuine need, if most things can wait until the next day or the next work period, then we are allowed to create boundaries. We are allowed to have times when we are fully released from work concerns, when we direct our attention to other aspects of life, when we practice being unburdened. This is not neglect. This is wisdom about sustainable engagement and the human need for rest. The same applies to news and information about larger events. There is value in being informed, in understanding what is happening in the world beyond our immediate experience. But there is no value in constant immersion in news that we can do nothing about in the moment, news that simply adds to our sense of burden without offering any opportunity for meaningful response. The Stoic practice is to engage with information purposefully. At times we have set aside for that engagement, and then to release it and return attention to what is actually before us. We can be informed without being constantly informed. We can care about larger issues without carrying constant anxiety about them. What emerges from all these practical applications is a pattern, a rhythm of discernment, action where action serves, and release of what cannot be carried productively. This pattern can become habitual, a way of meeting life that feels natural rather than forced. We begin to notice automatically when we are attempting to control what cannot be controlled. We catch ourselves carrying burdens that are not ours. We recognize the difference between responsible attention and unnecessary worry. And we practice release in countless small moments throughout the day, setting down what need not be carried, returning attention to what is actually present and actually ours. This practice becomes particularly valuable during transitions, those moments when we move from one activity or context to another, moving from work to home, moving from engagement with a problem to rest, moving from interaction with others to solitude. These transitions are opportunities for deliberate release. We can pause, take a breath, and consciously acknowledge that we are setting down what belonged to the previous context. We do not need to carry work concerns into our evening. We do not need to carry the difficulties of one conversation into the next. We do not need to carry the burdens of the day into the night. The physical act of transition can support this mental release. The Stoics understood that we are embodied beings, and that physical actions can help establish mental states. The act of closing a door, of changing clothes, of washing hands, can serve as a marker of transition, a small ritual that says this context is complete and a new one is beginning. We can use these moments deliberately, pausing to release what belonged to what came before, and arriving in what comes next without unnecessary weight. This might sound simple, and in a sense it is, but simplicity is not the same as ease. The habit of carrying burdens is strong in most of us. It can feel almost like duty, like care, like responsibility. To release what we have become accustomed to carrying requires practice and repeated choice. It requires trusting that we will not forget what matters if we stop worrying about it constantly. It requires believing that we serve our responsibilities better by carrying only what is genuinely ours rather than attempting to carry everything. The evidence that this is true comes from experience. When we practice release, when we set down what is not ours to carry, we find that we have more capacity for what is ours. We think more clearly. We act more effectively. This is not a promise that life becomes easy. It is a recognition that we meet life better when we meet it without unnecessary burden. The Stoics did not promise a life without difficulty. They lived in a world at least as challenging as ours, and they faced personal losses and public crises that tested them severely. What they offered was a way of meeting difficulty without adding to it the additional weight of illusion. The illusion that worry serves as preparation, that anxiety serves as care, that carrying what cannot be carried serves anything at all. They taught that we could face what is real with courage and clarity, that we could act from our best judgment, and that we could then release outcomes to the larger movement of events that we do not control. In each case, the practice is the same. Discern what is yours. Address it or plan to address it. Release what is not yours. This rhythm, repeated through the day, through the weeks, through the years, becomes a way of living that is both lighter and more effective than the alternative. It becomes the practical expression of Stoic wisdom, not as abstract philosophy but as lived experience. And it offers, in countless small moments, the possibility of peace not because circumstances are perfect, but because we have learned what to carry and what to set down. As we move now into these final reflections, we find ourselves returning not to a beginning, but to a different relationship with what we have explored together. The Stoics understood that philosophy is not merely a subject to be studied, but a practice to be lived, and that understanding deepens not through a single encounter with an idea, but through patient return and gentle integration. We have walked together through the landscape of release, examined the nature of burdens, and considered what it means to distinguish between what is ours to carry and what we might set down. Now we allow these ideas to settle, to find their place not as abstract concepts but as living wisdom that accompanies us beyond this particular conversation. There is something profoundly Stoic in this process of integration. Marcus Aurelius did not write his Meditations as a finished treatise to be read once and set aside. He returned again and again to the same fundamental insights, approaching them from different angles, allowing them to deepen through repetition and reflection. His private writings reveal a mind engaged in continuous practice, reminding himself of what he already knew because knowing and living are not the same thing. We might understand our time together in this same spirit. The ideas we have explored are not meant to be collected like objects on a shelf, but to be integrated, to become part of how we move through our days. When we speak of integration, we are speaking of a kind of dissolution, not a dissolution of the ideas themselves, but of the separation between understanding and being. A concept that remains purely intellectual, however beautiful or true, has not yet been integrated. It becomes integrated when it disappears into our way of seeing, when we no longer need to consciously remember it because it has become part of how we naturally perceive and respond. This process takes time, cannot be forced or hurried. It happens through a combination of attention and patience, through returning to the ideas not with the urgency of grasping but with the gentleness of recognition. Consider how a path forms in a forest. It is not carved all at once with violence and effort. Instead, it emerges gradually through repeated passage. Each footfall barely marks the earth, but over time, through many gentle passages, the way becomes clear. The ground remembers. This is how wisdom integrates itself into our lives. Through repeated encounter, through patient return, through allowing the ideas to mark us gently until the way becomes natural. We are not trying to memorize principles or force ourselves into new patterns. We are simply allowing something true to become familiar, trusting that familiarity will, in time, become second nature. The Stoics spoke often of philosophy as medicine for the soul. This metaphor is illuminating when we consider integration. Medicine works not through our conscious effort, but through processes of absorption and transformation that happen beyond our direct control. We take the medicine, yes, but then we must allow it to work. We cannot force healing through intensity of will. Similarly, philosophical understanding cannot be integrated through force. We encounter the ideas, we consider them, we allow them to enter our awareness, and then we must trust the natural processes of mind and being to incorporate what is useful. This trust is itself a kind of wisdom, a recognition that not everything beneficial happens through direct effort. Throughout our exploration, we have returned repeatedly to the theme of release. Not release as abandonment or carelessness, but release as a form of wisdom, a way of honoring what is truly ours to address by setting down what is not. This distinction, so central to Stoic thought, is perhaps more important now than it has ever been. We live in a time of extraordinary access to information, to the problems and sufferings of the world, to endless streams of concerns that we might potentially care about. Without discernment, without the capacity to distinguish between what is ours to carry and what we must release, this access becomes a form of burden that no human being was meant to bear. The Stoics offer us not callousness but clarity, not indifference but appropriate engagement, not a turning away from the world but a sustainable way of being in it. When Seneca wrote about the shortness of life, he was not suggesting that life is merely brief, though it is that. He was pointing to how much of our limited time we spend entangled with concerns that are not truly ours, carried away by worries that belong to circumstances beyond our influence, depleted by the weight of burdens we cannot actually address. The person who learns to release what is not theirs to carry, Seneca suggests, discovers that life is suddenly longer, richer, more present. Not because time itself has changed, but because they are no longer spreading their finite attention across infinite concerns. They have learned the art of concentration, of bringing their full presence to what actually matters, to what they can actually influence. This capacity for discernment and release is not something we achieve once and possess forever. It is a practice that requires daily attention, a skill that deepens through repeated use. Each day presents new opportunities to notice what we are carrying, to ask whether these burdens are truly ours, to practice the gentle art of setting down what does not belong to us. This is not a practice of perfection. There will be days when we find ourselves tangled in concerns we cannot address, weighted with worries that serve no purpose. The practice is not to never pick up such burdens, but to notice more quickly when we have, and to become more skilled at the act of release. As we reflect on what it means to live with this practice of release, we might consider how it changes our relationship with time itself. When we are burdened with concerns that are not truly ours to address, when we are carrying the weight of problems we cannot solve and circumstances we cannot change, time becomes heavy. Minutes feel long not because we are present in them, but because we are struggling against them, wrestling with what we cannot control, exhausting ourselves in futile resistance. The day drags not because nothing is happening, but because we are engaged in continuous, invisible labor that produces no fruit. We are pushing against immovable objects, trying to control what cannot be controlled, and the effort, though it accomplishes nothing outward, depletes us thoroughly. In contrast, when we practice appropriate release, when we carry only what is truly ours to carry, time often feels different. Not necessarily faster, but lighter, more fluid, more present. We find that we have energy for what actually matters because we are not exhausting ourselves with what does not. The hours of our day are no longer divided among countless concerns, but can be brought more fully to fewer, more significant engagements. This is one of the great paradoxes of Stoic practice. By accepting what we cannot control, by releasing what is not ours to change, we do not become less effective in the world. We often become more so, because our limited energy is directed toward what we can actually influence rather than dissipated across what we cannot. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journals, returns again and again to this theme. He reminds himself that he has a sphere of influence, a domain of genuine responsibility, and that this sphere is both smaller than his ego might wish and more significant than his anxiety might recognize. He can control his own responses, his own judgments, his own character. He cannot control outcomes, other people, the turning of events. This is not a limitation to be lamented, but a clarity to be embraced. It tells him where to direct his attention, where to apply his effort, what is actually his work in the world. Everything else, no matter how much he might care about it, is not his burden to carry in the sense of worrying over it, struggling with it, exhausting himself in futile attempts to control it. This clarity about our sphere of influence is deeply liberating, but it is also easily misunderstood. It is not an excuse for withdrawal or indifference. Marcus himself was emperor, deeply engaged with the problems of his time, working daily to address challenges that affected millions of people. His Stoicism did not lead him to retreat from responsibility, but to engage with it more sustainably. The difference was internal. He did his work without the added weight of trying to control what he could not control. He addressed what was within his power with full attention and released what was not with equal attention. This combination of engagement and release, of deep care and appropriate letting go, allowed him to function in an extraordinarily demanding role without being crushed by its weight. We might consider what this could mean in our own lives. Most of us are not emperors with the fate of nations in our hands, but each of us faces our own version of overwhelming responsibility, our own encounters with problems too large for us to solve, our own temptation to carry burdens that are not truly ours. The practice is the same regardless of scale. We learn to distinguish between what is ours to address and what we must release. We bring our full engagement to the former and practice appropriate letting go of the latter. This is not a single decision, but a continuous practice, a way of moving through the day with attention and discernment. One of the most challenging aspects of this practice is learning to release the outcomes of our own efforts. We can control our actions, our intentions, our care and attention in addressing what is ours to address. We cannot control how things turn out. We cannot guarantee that our efforts will succeed, that our care will be received as we intend it, that our work will produce the results we hope for. This is perhaps the deepest form of release the Stoics invite us to practice. Not just releasing what was never ours to carry in the first place, but releasing even the outcomes of what we do carry, what we do address with full effort and attention. Epictetus speaks to this when he distinguishes between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Our effort is up to us. Our intention is up to us. Our character and our choices are up to us. The results, the outcomes, the way things turn out, these are not fully up to us, no matter how much effort we invest. They depend on countless factors beyond our control, on the choices of other people, on circumstances we cannot foresee, on the complex unfolding of events in which we are only one participant among many. To burden ourselves with responsibility for outcomes is to claim ownership of what is not ours. It is to carry a weight we were never meant to bear. This does not mean we do not care about outcomes. Of course we care. We work toward outcomes we believe are good and beneficial. But caring about an outcome and being burdened with responsibility for controlling it are different things. One is natural and appropriate. The other is a form of confusion, a misunderstanding of where our power actually lies. When we can distinguish between these, when we can care deeply about outcomes while releasing our attempt to control them, we discover a new kind of freedom. We can engage fully without being crushed by the weight of factors beyond our control. There is something deeply practical about this understanding when we allow it to settle into our daily experience. Consider the difference between two people facing a similar challenge. Both care deeply about the situation. Both invest significant effort in addressing it. Both hope for a positive outcome. The difference is internal. One person has learned to release what is not within their control. They do their work with full attention, but they are not burdened by the need to control factors beyond their influence. The other has not learned this release. They are not only doing their work but also carrying the invisible weight of trying to control what cannot be controlled, of taking responsibility for factors beyond their influence, of struggling against the limits of their power. The first person is no less engaged, but they are more sustainable. Their energy goes into effective action rather than futile struggle. They sleep more easily because they can release the day, knowing they have done what was theirs to do. This is what the Stoics mean when they speak of tranquility. Not a life free from challenges or difficulties, not a state of perpetual calm regardless of circumstances, but a quality of inner steadiness that comes from understanding what is within our power and what is not. Tranquility, in the Stoic sense, is not the absence of engagement but the presence of wisdom about where our power lies. It is the peace that comes from doing our work without the added burden of trying to control what we cannot control. It is the rest that comes from releasing what is not ours to carry. We have spoken throughout our time together about the evening practice of release, the conscious setting down of the day's concerns as we prepare for rest. This practice is worth returning to as we integrate what we have explored. The evening offers us a natural boundary, a point of transition when we might deliberately notice what we are still carrying and consider what might be set down. Not everything, of course. There are genuine responsibilities that continue, real concerns that require our ongoing attention. But even these do not need to be actively carried through the night. We can acknowledge them, entrust them to tomorrow's attention, and release them from the immediate grip of our awareness. This evening release is not merely practical, though it is certainly that. It is also philosophical. It is an expression of understanding about the nature of time and the nature of our power. We cannot address tomorrow's concerns tonight. We cannot solve future problems in the present moment. We can only do what is before us to do right now, and when the day's work is complete, when we have done what was ours to do, the wise response is release. Not abandonment of responsibility, but recognition that we have fulfilled today's responsibility and that tomorrow will require tomorrow's attention. To carry tomorrow's burdens tonight is not noble or responsible. It is a confusion about time, an attempt to do what cannot be done. Seneca, who wrote so perceptively about time and how we spend it, understood this deeply. He observed how people exhaust themselves not primarily through their actual work, but through their worry about work, not through present challenges, but through anxious rehearsal of future challenges, not through what they are actually doing, but through their mental struggle with what they might have to do or what might go wrong. This anticipatory suffering, Seneca notes, is often worse than any actual hardship we face, and it is entirely self-imposed. We create it through our imagination, sustain it through our worry, and carry it as an unnecessary burden that depletes us without producing any benefit. The Stoic response to this tendency is not to stop thinking about the future entirely. Planning is reasonable. Preparation is wise. The Stoics themselves practiced premeditatio malorum, the deliberate contemplation of potential difficulties. But there is a fundamental difference between useful preparation and useless worry. Preparation is focused, time-limited, and oriented toward action. Worry is diffuse, ongoing, and produces no benefit. Preparation asks, what might happen and how might I respond? Worry asks the same questions but without moving toward answers, without allowing the consideration to reach resolution, without setting down the concern once it has been reasonably addressed. Learning to distinguish between preparation and worry is part of the practice of release. When we find ourselves returning again and again to a concern, rehearsing scenarios, feeling the weight of future possibilities, we might pause and ask whether this is useful preparation or useless worry. If there is something specific we can do to prepare, some action we can take, some skill we can develop, then that is worth our attention. But if we are simply circulating through anxious possibilities without any corresponding action, if we are carrying the weight of potential futures that may never arrive, then we are engaged in the kind of useless suffering that Seneca warns against. This is the moment for release, for conscious setting down of what serves no purpose. The practice of release, as we have explored it, is ultimately about freedom. Not freedom from responsibility or challenge, but freedom from unnecessary burden, from useless suffering, from the weight of concerns that are not truly ours to carry. This freedom is available in every moment, but it requires something from us. It requires attention, discernment, and the willingness to set down what we habitually pick up. It requires us to notice what we are carrying and to ask, again and again, is this mine to carry? Is this within my power to address? Is this burden serving any purpose, or is it simply weight without benefit? As we continue to sit with these ideas, allowing them to settle and integrate, we might recognize that the practice of release is not separate from the practice of engagement. They are two aspects of the same wisdom, two expressions of the same understanding. To release what is not ours to carry is precisely what allows us to fully engage with what is. The person who has learned appropriate release is not less present or less caring. They are often more so, because their energy is not divided across countless concerns but can be brought fully to what actually matters, to what they can actually influence. This is one of the great insights the Stoics offer us. Wisdom is not about doing more or carrying more or concerning ourselves with more. It is often about doing less, carrying less, concerning ourselves with less, but doing so with greater depth, greater presence, greater wholeness of attention. Marcus Aurelius, despite his enormous responsibilities, regularly reminded himself to do less. Not because he was advocating for laziness or neglect of duty, but because he recognized how much of what we typically do is unnecessary, how much energy we spend on matters that do not truly require our attention, how much we scatter ourselves across concerns that are not actually ours to address. When we learn to release what is not ours, when we develop the capacity to distinguish between what requires our attention and what does not, we discover something unexpected. We discover that we have more capacity than we thought for what truly matters. Not because we have somehow gained more energy or time, but because we are no longer dissipating what we have on what serves no purpose. The river that runs in 1,000 small streams barely moistens the ground. The same river, flowing in a single channel, has the power to shape stone. Our attention, our energy, our care, these work the same way. When divided across countless concerns, they accomplish little and exhaust us thoroughly. When focused on what is truly ours to address, they have genuine power, and paradoxically, they sustain us rather than deplete us. This is not to suggest that focused attention is easy or that releasing what is not ours requires no effort. The habits of mind that lead us to pick up unnecessary burdens are deep and persistent. We live in a culture that often celebrates busyness, that equates care with worry, that suggests that if we are not concerned about something, we must not care about it. These messages shape us in ways we may not fully recognize. They create internal pressure to carry more, to concern ourselves with more, to feel responsible for more than is actually within our power to address. Learning to release what is not ours often means working against these internalized messages, questioning assumptions we have never consciously examined. The Stoics invite us to examine these assumptions carefully. When we find ourselves burdened with a particular concern, we might pause and ask not only whether this is within our power to address, but also why we feel we should be carrying it. Is it because it is genuinely ours to address? Or is it because we have internalized some belief about what caring looks like, what responsibility demands, what it means to be a good person? Sometimes we carry burdens not because they are ours, but because we fear what it would mean about us if we set them down. We fear being seen as uncaring, irresponsible, indifferent. But the Stoics help us see that there is a profound difference between indifference and wisdom, between not caring and not carrying what is not ours to carry. True care, the Stoics suggest, is discerning. It recognizes that our capacity to care is not infinite, and that if we attempt to spread it infinitely, we diminish its effectiveness everywhere. The person who truly cares about a few things deeply is often more beneficial to the world than the person who cares about everything superficially. This is not a justification for narrowness or selfishness. The Stoics were deeply engaged with the world, committed to the common good, devoted to justice and human flourishing. But they recognized that sustainable engagement requires boundaries, requires discernment about where our care can be most effective, requires the wisdom to release what is not ours to carry so that we can fully attend to what is. There is a kind of humility in this recognition. It acknowledges that we are limited beings, that our power is finite, that we cannot address every problem or carry every burden. This acknowledgement might initially feel like a diminishment, a recognition of our smallness or inadequacy. We are finite beings in an infinite world. We have real but limited power. We can influence some things and not others. This is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be understood. When we understand it clearly, when we accept it fully, it becomes the foundation for wisdom rather than a source of frustration. Epictetus, himself a former slave, understood limitation intimately. He knew what it was to have virtually no control over external circumstances, to be subject to forces vastly more powerful than himself, to face the daily reality of how little he could control in the world around him. Yet his philosophy is not one of despair or resignation. It is one of profound freedom, rooted precisely in this clear understanding of what is within our power and what is not. The freedom Epictetus points to does not depend on having control over external circumstances. It depends on recognizing clearly what we do control, our own judgments and responses and character, and bringing our full attention to that domain while releasing our struggle with what lies beyond it. This teaching is just as relevant for those who have considerable external power as it is for those who have little. Marcus Aurelius, who had vastly more external power than Epictetus, found the same wisdom necessary and liberating. No matter how much power we have in the world, there will always be more that lies beyond our control than within it. There will always be circumstances we cannot change, outcomes we cannot guarantee, people we cannot control, events we cannot prevent. The question is not how to gain more control, but how to live wisely with the control we have, how to engage fully with what is within our power while releasing our struggle with what is not. As we approach the completion of our time together, we find ourselves not at an ending so much as at a point of continuation. The ideas we have explored, the practices we have considered, the wisdom we have encountered from the Stoics, these do not conclude with the ending of this conversation. They continue in whatever way you choose to carry them forward, in whatever way they have touched or influenced or clarified your understanding. Philosophy, the Stoics remind us, is not a spectator sport. It is not something we observe from a distance, but something we live, something that shapes how we move through our days, how we respond to challenges, how we carry what is ours to carry and release what is not. The practice of release, as we have explored it through the Stoic lens, is an ongoing practice. It is not something we master once and then possess forever, but something we engage with daily, moment by moment, as we notice what we are carrying and ask whether these burdens are truly ours. Some days the practice will feel natural and easy. We will find ourselves releasing unnecessary concerns almost automatically, moving through the day with appropriate lightness, distinguishing clearly between what is ours to address and what we must let go. Other days will be more difficult. We will find ourselves tangled in worries that serve no purpose, weighted with concerns we cannot actually address, struggling with the old habit of picking up burdens that are not ours to carry. Marcus Aurelius, despite decades of philosophical practice, still found it necessary to remind himself daily of principles he had long understood. He still noticed himself being pulled toward old habits of response, still caught himself struggling with what he could not control, still needed to consciously return to the fundamental distinctions that grounded his practice. This is not failure. This is the nature of being human, of living in a body and mind that have accumulated habits over a lifetime, of engaging with a world that constantly presents challenges to our equanimity. The measure of practice is not whether we ever struggle or forget or get caught in old patterns. The measure is whether we notice more quickly when we do, whether we can return to clarity with less effort, whether the path back to wisdom becomes more familiar and accessible over time. This is the forest path we spoke of earlier, formed not through perfect steps but through patient return. Each time we notice that we have picked up a burden that is not ours and choose to set it down, each time we distinguish between what is within our power and what is not, each time we release useless worry and return to appropriate engagement, we are walking the path. We are forming the way through gentle repetition. There is no destination at which we arrive and declare ourselves complete. The Stoics understood philosophy as a lifelong practice, a way of being rather than a state to achieve. Even the wise person in Stoic thought is someone who practices wisdom, not someone who has transcended the need for practice. The difference is in how they meet these experiences, how quickly they recognize what is happening, how naturally they return to clarity and appropriate response. This is what deepens over time, not through dramatic transformation but through patient, repeated engagement with the practice. As you move forward from this conversation, You carry with you not a set of rules to follow but a framework for paying attention, a way of examining what you are carrying and why, a permission to set down what is not yours to carry. The Stoics offer us a vocabulary for this examination, distinctions that help us see more clearly, examples from their own lives and struggles that remind us we are engaged in something ancient and human and worthy of our attention. But the practice itself, the daily engagement with release and discernment, this is yours to shape according to your own life, your own circumstances, your own particular constellation of challenges and responsibilities. You will find your own way of working with these ideas. Perhaps the evening practice of conscious release will become meaningful for you, a daily ritual of setting down the day's concerns as you prepare for rest. Perhaps you will develop the habit of pausing during the day when you notice tension or anxiety, asking yourself what you are carrying and whether it is truly yours. Perhaps you will find particular Stoic distinctions between problems and facts, between what is up to us and what is not, becoming part of how you naturally perceive situations. Or perhaps these ideas will work on you in ways you do not consciously track, quietly influencing how you respond, gradually shifting your relationship with burden and responsibility in ways you only notice in retrospect. As we rest here together in these final moments, there is nothing you need to hold on to from this conversation, nothing you need to grasp or memorize or force yourself to remember. What has been meaningful will remain with you in its own way, will integrate itself according to its own process, will emerge when needed without your conscious effort to retain it. This trust in natural process, in the wisdom of allowing rather than forcing, is itself Stoic. We do our part, we engage with ideas, we practice attention and discernment, and then we release even our attachment to the outcome of that practice. We trust that what is true and useful will find its way into our lives, will shape us in ways both visible and invisible, will be there when we need it. The night continues around us, quiet and vast. Tomorrow will come with its own concerns, its own opportunities for practice, its own invitations to distinguish between what is ours to carry and what we might release. For now, this is enough. This consideration, this exploration, this time given to understanding the art of letting go. May you carry forward whatever has been useful here. May you set down whatever burdens are not truly yours. May you find the freedom that comes from engaging fully with what matters while releasing what does not. The Stoics walk with you still, across the centuries, offering their hard-won wisdom about what it means to live well in a world we cannot control. Their words settle into silence now, but their practice continues, in you, in each choice to release what is not yours, in each return to what is.